I've always found solace in the rhythmic clinking of my crochet hook against the yarn, a form of therapy that allows my mind to drift, cradled in creativity. For the last 5 years, this has been my escape, a little world where I could weave warmth into blankets and gifts for friends and family. When my friend Lucy told me she was expecting her first child, I knew I had to create something special for her, a unique, hand-crocheted blanket that would not only keep the baby warm but also carry the love of a friend. I spent countless evenings after work curating the perfect yarn, deep greens and soft browns, envisioning the joy it would bring. Once the blanket was completed, its imperfections felt like the very essence of handmade art. Each stitch told the tale of my meticulous attention and love. But then, right before the baby shower, panic emerged as I realized I had made a small but glaring error, a stitch pattern inconsistency that not only hurt my eyes but felt like a betrayal of my craft. Refusing to allow this flaw to grab hold, I dismissed it, telling myself Lucy wouldn't care, that the blanket was more about intention and love than precision. However, when I presented it at the shower, she looked puzzled at first, and then disappointed. "Did you mean for it to be like this?" she asked gently, and the warmth in my chest began to cool as I mumbled a half-hearted excuse about it being an artistic choice, wishing for her to be enchanted rather than concerned. The laughter around us felt heavier now, and it was like the moment stretched as I noticed her glancing at that one lopsided corner, her fingers running along the stitches. It all spiraled when, prompted by her mother's insistent critique about blending techniques, I heard Lucy whisper, "Maybe it would just be better if you fixed it." A sudden wave of confusion rushed over me. Fix it? This was my creation. The very idea of unraveling hours of work started to feel like an imposition on the heart behind the stitches. I nodded, my throat tight, and made a decision that felt heavy and liberating at once. I politely reclaimed the blanket that evening, stating that I'd prefer to have it a little longer to perfect it. The room fell silent, as if I had just declared a national emergency. I felt a sinking feeling wash over me. Was I being unreasonable? I distanced myself from the party, a dryness in my throat as I left with my imperfect creation clutched to my chest, hiding my face in its soft fibers. In those moments alone, I grappled with guilt spiraling into indignation. How could anyone expect me to compromise my art, even for love? Yet, the evening left a lingering taste of regret, a sadness threading through my heart like thin strands of yarn unraveling. Days went by with the blanket set aside, untouched, as I continued my needlework but felt the crack in our friendship widening whenever her name surfaced in conversations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of avoidance, I decided to reach out, sending her a message to discuss my feelings, trying to be open but also tucked away in my vulnerability. Her reply was surprisingly warm, filled with understanding. She confessed to feeling guilty for criticizing something I poured my heart into, and suddenly, I felt the fog clear. I wasn't the only one affected by this moment. We talked it through, weaving our misunderstandings together like a tapestry until it formed something new. I promised to fix the blanket, relaying that my imperfections were a reflection of growth, a lesson in every stitch rather than a product of shame. In the end, I brought back a completed but refined blanket, complete with a note that simply read, "Made with love, flaws and all." She hugged me tightly and smiled through grateful tears, and as I stood there tucked into that moment, I realized the beauty of this journey wasn't just in the work I created but in the connections it fostered, the acceptance of imperfections shared like patched-up seams. So here I am, reflecting not just on crochet skills but on friendships and growth, recognizing that sometimes, love is not about perfection, it's about the willingness to embrace each other's patterns, oddities and all. Update, just last week, Lucy sent me a picture of her new baby curled up in the very blanket I'd almost thrown away. All the flaws whispered stories of friendship, and as I stared at that little bundle, I felt at peace, not just with the blanket but with the understanding that in each stitch, I'd learned more than I ever expected about love, patience, and acceptance. As I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, casting warm patterns on the wooden surface, I thought about how much had changed since I first began crocheting that blanket for Lucy. With every stitch, not only was I creating something tangible, but I was also weaving together moments of our friendship, those late-night talks about dreams and fears, those shared giggles over coffee that turned into hours, and the quiet afternoons where we simply existed in each other's company. The blanket had started as a simple gift, a gesture to celebrate her new role as a mother, but it had unintentionally transformed into a metaphor for our relationship, full of quirks, imperfections, and ultimately, love. I recalled the heated conversation we'd had when I hesitated to give it to her, worried about the mistakes I had made in the pattern, as if flaws would somehow taint the essence of what I was offering. Lucy, however, had looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "It's perfect because you made it for me." The errors are part of its charm. I hadn't understood her then, not completely, but as I gazed at her little one, the image of a tiny hand cradled under the colorful blanket, I felt a soft warmth blossoming in my chest. The blanket was not merely fabric, it was a tapestry of shared memories, acceptance, and the realization that none of us is flawless, yet we cherish each other regardless. Each loop and twist in the yarn told a story, reminding me that love isn't about delivering perfection but rather about giving ourselves the space to grow, to sometimes falter, without fear of judgment. As I brewed a cup of chamomile to accompany my thoughts, I mentally revisited those past emotions, the hesitation, the doubt that crept in when Lucy offered to overlook my mistakes. I had grappled with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if my creations would ever be worthy of her and the new life she was nurturing. Yet as I watched that photo again, I felt a gentle shift within myself. Suddenly, I was filled with a sense of gratitude for the journey we had taken together, for the lessons learned within the tight stitches of a yarn life spun with care and friendship. I allowed myself the grace to feel fondness for the little imperfections I once so criticized, realizing they were stepping stones on this path of understanding and compassion. As I finished my tea and looked back at the wonderfully imperfect blanket wrapped around Lucy's baby, I knew I would carry this lesson with me as life continued to weave its intricate patterns, unafraid of the deliberate messiness that makes us who we are. And now, this blanket, much like our friendship, would serve as a constant reminder that sometimes, the most beautiful creations emerge from embracing the flaws instead of hiding from them. As the evening settled, saturating my living room with a warm, golden hue, I found myself getting lost in memories that had woven together my experience with crochet and friendship. I had picked up the crochet hook years ago as a way to foster a creative outlet while grappling with the stress of my then demanding job. Each pull of yarn through the loop felt meditative, allowing me to escape into a world where each creation existed solely through my hands. And though the projects came to life, imperfectly at times, they were birthed from my heart. I could remember the first blanket I ever made, a cacophony of colors that I thought would all blend beautifully but instead clashed with a jarring audacity. I loved it nonetheless, not for its elegance but for the hours I spent knotting together both yarn and my dreams. However, with Lucy, it was different. She had filled that blanket with stories, laughter, and momentary tears, making it tangible with memories that stretched beyond physical time. Sipping the last remnants of my tea, I allowed myself to linger on the importance of those little imperfections. I could feel now how they mirrored our evolving friendship, two uncertain souls, navigating life's unpredictable waters, sometimes taking a wrong turn but always finding their way back to one another. The moment I had taken back the blanket after Lucy first expressed disappointment was unsettling, a moment where I was too caught in my own expectations to recognize her embrace of the flaws. The night had been tense as we circled around our unspoken words until, finally, I decided to reclaim the wayward stitches, wrapping that crochet into the fabric of my being. Yet, now, reflecting on that very same blanket brought me serenity. Each crooked line symbolized the hurdles we had faced, the miscommunications and reconciliations that had stitched our hearts closer. And as the tranquility of the night seeped into my thoughts, I opened my phone to the picture Lucy had sent. There was the soft, serene image of her baby, wrapped snugly in the blanket, that patchwork of color cradling her little one as they drifted into sleep. At that moment, those carefully crafted imperfections were stripped of their criticism. They told a story, a narrative of love instilled and nurtured. Amidst the chaotic threads of our lives, I realized we were meant to be a bit messy, unexpectedly colorful, intertwining like yarn in a basket. My heart swelled, filled with gratitude and recognizing the gentle waves of forgiveness that wash over us in times of doubt. I had not solely crocheted a blanket, I had crocheted a legacy of acceptance, a reminder that our struggles shape us and that friendships thrive in their honesty. I tucked the memory away for the future, promising myself to carry this lesson onwards, emboldened to embrace life's delightful imperfections without trepidation. In the days that followed, I found myself not just embracing my own imperfections but becoming a beacon for others. My next project, an intricate shawl, turned out to be a manifold of unique colors and patterns, much like the people I cherished in my life. I started sharing my creative process on social media, inviting others to join along as we crocheted together. The response was overwhelming, each post lit up with comments of shared experiences of crafting, bonds formed through honest discussion about life's inevitable messiness. The shawl became a metaphor for every bit of vibrant imperfection, adorned with laughter and tales of growth. I gifted it to Lucy on her birthday, a symbol not of our struggles but of our flourishing friendship. As I handed it to her, the embrace we shared held unspoken words of understanding and gratitude, weaving together all we had experienced. And so, as I come to the close of this reflection, I realize how the greatest creations in my life, be it in crochet or in relationships, have come not from striving for perfection, but from daring to embrace chaos. The blanket still serves as a memento, a connection between two souls learning to navigate their own paths, and I welcome each new stitch I add to the ongoing tapestry of friendship and love that life continues to offer. In this journey, I have found joy not just in the finished product but in every knot, twist, and turn we face, and there lies true beauty. Every night, without fail, the air would grow thick with a heavy silence at precisely 10:52 p.m., as if the world had pressed pause on itself. Living in a small town like Brookshire, this unnerving ritual was an accepted part of life, a peculiar tradition that I had come to know for as long as I could remember. I would watch the clock tick down from my bedroom window, the cool moonlight casting long shadows across my floor, the only sound being the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. It was strange, really, how nobody ever spoke about it, not even in whispers. My parents never bothered to explain why every household, every shop, and even the streetlights would dim or flicker for 12 minutes each night, as if the entire town was collectively holding its breath. I often found myself puzzled, torn between my curiosity and an inexplicable instinct to just let it be, to let it weave itself into the fabric of my life like a long-held family secret. But that fateful summer night, curiosity won, fueled by a restless spirit and an idea that maybe, just maybe, I could peek behind the curtain of this nightly mystery that had haunted me. As I stitched together my plan, the thrill of uncovering a long-buried secret coursed through me like electricity, making my heart race with each passing second toward midnight. Armed with a flashlight and an insatiable need for answers, I slipped out of my room, careful not to disturb my sleeping parents. I stepped onto the cobblestone street, the night air crisp against my skin as I ventured down my familiar lane. I felt the familiar thrill of danger tingling along my spine, but I was fueled by purpose now. My best friend Jacob had always said that fear itself was just an illusion, a construct of the mind to keep us inside neatly wrapped boxes. Tonight, I was stepping out of mine, determined to find out what happened when the clock struck 11. As I approached the town square, I noticed the stillness, the shops darkened and locked, the park benches empty under the blanket of night. My pulse quickened. I had never been this close to the heart of the town during a lockdown. At 10:58, I ducked behind a large oak tree, its gnarled branches dipping low like bent old men in conversation. I could see the glow of the clock tower illuminating the street in soft gold, casting everything in a surreal haze. Then, suddenly, at 10:59, a wave of tension swept through the air, and the familiar flickering began. The town inhaled deeply, and I felt the breath of it rush past me, a wild wind rising but with no sound to accompany it. At 11 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. I held my breath, straining to see beyond the shadows where the flickering flickered out entirely, leaving only the oppressive darkness draping over Brookshire. My flashlight's beam seemed feeble in comparison as I scanned my surroundings. Then I saw them, figures emerging slowly from every corner, gathering under the clock tower, their silhouettes merging and morphing into one another like the whispers of ghosts in the night. It was then that I realized the truth of the lockdown. They weren't ordinary townsfolk. They were different. They moved with a deliberate grace that sent chills running down my spine. As I stared in wide-eyed awe, I recognized familiar faces amongst the crowd, my neighbors, the shop owners, even the mailman, yet they wore strange expressions, devoid of any feeling I had ever associated with them. They seemed entranced, their eyes glossed over as they collectively shifted in rhythm, their bodies swaying as if conducting an invisible orchestra. I instinctively backed away, heart pounding in my ears, when I bumped into something solid, a single figure cloaked in dark fabric, its features obscured. I opened my mouth to scream, but panic paralyzed me, turning my voice to stone. That's when the figure leaned closer, a voice like gravel whispering, "If you want to know the truth, you must listen." The world around me melted into whispers, their secrets flying through the air, weaving tales of ancient pacts and sacrifices made to protect the town from the darkness beyond the edge of our small universe. Each night served as a mechanism of renewal, a moment to reinforce the bond between the town and whatever lurked outside our perimeter, a reminder of the fear that kept us all safe. Each of the 12 minutes before midnight allowed the townsfolk to offer up their fears, their regrets, to the void beyond. They would carry the weight of it while, for 12 minutes, Brookshire reclaimed its peace. As the clock struck 11 and the shadows began to disperse, everything settled into an eerie tranquility, I felt the oppressive weight of understanding settle over me like a shroud. I had learned something no one else had spoken aloud, a truth that forced me to see my home in a startling new light. I slipped away, my heart racing as I retraced my steps in the quiet night. By the time I was safely back in my room, shame washed over me. I realized that in seeking the truth, I had stepped away from the comforting lies that had woven the town together. I lay awake long after the clock had chimed again, the town clutching its secrets tight. What would I do with this knowledge? That night, for the first time, I understood the weight of my neighbor's silent burdens, and the following days felt different. I walked the streets of Brookshire with a growing sense of unease, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and yet so very right about the ritual that I had once found absurd. The updates to my daily life became riddled with reminders of that fateful night, the slight nods from shopkeepers, the knowing smiles from those who had participated willingly, and in those moments, I grappled with the choice between ignorance and understanding. Months passed, and though I hadn't shared this experience with a single soul, I noticed the town changing subtly. The conversations felt deeper, the laughter more genuine, as if we were all carrying the weight of knowledge with us. I pondered often, should I tell someone? Could sharing do more harm than good? In the end, I decided it was wisdom best left as a quiet companion, a ghost story of sorts, a tale that shaped my framework of perception about our collective existence and the invisible lines we draw to stay safe, because perhaps not all knowledge is meant to comfort. And each night, as the clock struck 10:52 and the town would lock down, I would breathe deep, thanking the universe for the moment I had taken a leap beyond the known, and into the deeper layers of what life in Brookshire truly meant. As the clock struck 10:52 every night, a sense of calm and acceptance settled over me, a warm blanket in the chilly embrace of the unknown. The routine had become an intricate part of my life in Brookshire, a place that often felt like a quaint postcard from the past, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Yet, as the siren wailed and the town fell silent around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was perched upon the edge of a precipice, gazing down into shadows that danced just out of sight. The first time I had experienced the lockdown, the eerie stillness that enveloped the streets, had been surreal. I was at a late-night study session with friends, the weight of midterms hanging heavy, our laughter spilling into the soft glow of the cafe's neon lights. Suddenly, the cheerful chatter was silenced by that haunting wail, and the cafe owner, a man with kindly eyes and a perpetual smile, turned off the main lights. "Don't worry, it will be over in just 12 minutes, he assured us, but the way his voice trembled slightly as he said it sent a chill down my spine. That first evening, curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly happen during those 12 minutes that required our town to lock down every night? I began to dig deeper, asking friends and neighbors, weaving through rumors and anecdotes, a silent detective with no plan beyond satiating my curiosity. Most, it seemed, had long since accepted the routine. It was a part of life in Brookshire, whispered about but never dissected. Still, I was undeterred, driven by an insatiable urge to uncover the truth, to reveal the hidden stories tucked between the seams of our town's fabric. Nights turned into weeks, and I collected stories that spoke of strange occurrences, muffled sounds echoing through the air, flickering lights, and sometimes, faint reflections in the windows that vanished when looked upon directly. But no one ever spoke about what lay behind those 12 minutes. Perhaps I was foolish, but I felt a peculiar sense of connection to whatever secret lingered in the shadows. It wasn't until one fateful night that I stumbled upon an old journal hidden in the attic of my grandmother's long-abandoned house. The journal belonged to a distant relative, a woman who had been deemed an outsider in our town decades ago, a name whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. As I flipped through its fragile pages, I felt her despair, her isolation echoing through the years. She wrote of a darkness that had encroached upon Brookshire, a darkness that could not be spoken of openly yet haunted the town's collective memory. Her words were cryptic, but they painted a chilling picture of the past, filled with a sense of foreboding that mirrored my unease. Each passage spoke of the loud sirens, a warning of sorts, summoning the townsfolk to protect themselves from what lay beyond the safety of their homes. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized this journal, once a neglected artifact, now pulsed with urgency, as if the weight of history was begging for acknowledgement. The next evening, I felt compelled to share everything I had learned with the town council. A handful of reluctant faces gathered in the community hall. I presented my findings, my heart racing with the fear of rejection, of being branded the town's nouveau conspiracy theorist. Surprisingly, a gentle murmur rolled through the room, people shifted uneasily in their seats but listened. It was then that Mrs. Haddock, my high school history teacher now with silver streaks winding through her hair, spoke up, her voice a soft echo against the walls. The lockdowns were initially a precaution, she admitted, back when strange things began happening, children going missing, strange lights in the woods. We created protocols, trying to keep fear at bay. The air thickened with unsaid words, the fear we'd all been harboring surged to the surface. It became clear, amid the muted gasps and shifting murmurs, that we had all felt the tremors of something lurking, something unwelcome, and in trying to shield our community, we had silenced the very whispers that could have liberated us. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes weary. My daughter went missing during the lockdown 3 years ago, she confessed, voice trembling. I just thought it was all a coincidence, a sad part of life, but it was never discussed. All we did was follow orders. In that moment, I felt the weight of the town's collective guilt, a shared complicity in shielding ourselves from the dark while allowing it to infiltrate our lives through silence. I understood, finally, that the knowledge we held wasn't just a burden, it was a catalyst for change. Over the following weeks, I wrote to each of my neighbors, shared stories, opened channels of communication, and we began to speak, not in fear, but with hope. The 12 minutes became a platform for healing. We marked that time by uniting, creating rituals of remembrance for the lost, a declaration that we would not let history repeat itself. It was empowering to reclaim our narrative, to turn shadows into light, and slowly, the sirens transformed from dreadful reminders into signals of resilience. I began to realize that, sometimes, tearing down the walls we build was necessary, not just for our peace of mind but for the collective heart of a town that had been silenced too long. And as night fell and the sirens rang true, I joined my neighbors on the front porch, sharing our stories, reclaiming our past, and building a future free from the chains of dark whispers. The fear transformed into a gentle solidarity, as recognition settled in. That night, as the clock struck 10:52, I took a deep breath, allowing gratitude to wash over me, not just for the truth revealed, but for each soul that dared to be vulnerable, to share a story, to embrace the discomfort that eventually led to our coming together. Little did I realize that this was just the beginning. The nights that followed unfolded with a surprising cadence of trust and connection. Every 10:52 brought with it not just the sound of the sirens marking the lockdown, but the unmistakable sense of unity that had been forged in our shared vulnerability. Each evening, more families joined us on the porch, stories flowing like warm honey, sticky and sweet, their narratives intertwining with one another, creating a tapestry of lives colored by hardship, resilience, and kinship. We spoke of old neighbors long forgotten, of the eccentricities that once defined our small town, and of the chilling events that led to our customs, each revelation a thread pulling tighter around our community, stitching the fabric of Brookshire back together. I discovered Mrs. Thompson had once been a gifted violinist, performing with a local symphony before the lockdown enforced her seclusion, and I encouraged her to play once again. The mournful notes she produced carried a haunting beauty that seemed to echo our past sorrows while beckoning hope towards the future. But it wasn't only the adults who found their voices, even the children, who had previously been hushed by the fatigue of our town's rumors, began to share their dreams and fear, whispers of monsters under their beds emerging lightheartedly transformed into shadows of the unknown that haunted us all. As the days slipped by, I watched the essence of Brookshire metamorphose. The self-imposed barriers that once shackled us fell away, replaced by a sense of belonging that filled the gaps of our lives. Neighbors ventured away from their homes after the lockdowns were lifted, engaging in spontaneous community events. I found myself enveloped in this whirlwind of rekindled friendship, revitalizing not just our town but also my sense of purpose. One chilly evening, after another night of storytelling, we decided to shift the lockdown. Rather than retreating behind closed doors at 10:52, we would share a meal, a simple gathering to acknowledge the passage of time and the strength we had collectively developed. So Friday became our unity night. Candles flickered on tables sprawled end to end across Main Street, laughter mingled with the lingering silence of the sirens that would still wail, serving as a reminder of what we once faced, but also of how far we had come. However, as the weeks rolled into months, I started to feel a peculiar tug at my heart, a flutter of unresolved tension that I couldn't quite place. Every so often, I'd catch fleeting glances of unease hidden beneath the smiles shared over meals. I noticed that each night, some families still chose to stay behind locked doors, as if they held fast to an instinct that warned them not to fully embrace this newfound peace. One night, a particularly fierce storm battered Brookshire, and the sirens howled through the air, mirroring the thunder above. The lights flickered, and after a moment of hesitation, our gathering dispersed, people reluctant but ultimately retreating to the safety of their homes. Little did I know, as I settled into bed that evening, that my fleeting concerns were about to crystallize into something far more real. The next morning, just before dawn's light began to spill across the horizon, a frantic knock on my door jolted me awake. It was Mr. Holloway, the town's old librarian, who looked pale and shaken. He gasped for breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he beckoned me outside. "It's happening again," he said, "you have to see." We hurried down the street, following the shadows of our neighbors emerging from their homes, all us drawn together by a mutual fear. The streets of Brookshire felt like a haunted morning, mournful and heavy. As I stepped outside, the atmosphere shimmered with something otherworldly. Our community gathered at the center of town in wide-eyed confusion, murmurs of disbelief echoing the early mist. Then it came, a sudden and powerful shift in the air as a figure appeared at the edge of Ellis Park, bathed in the gray light of dawn. It was an old woman, her face weathered with lines wrapping around cautious blue eyes, an aura that tugged at something deep within me. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a large, brightly painted box adorned with swirling designs reminiscent of the stories we had been sharing. "When the townsfolk forget the darkness that comes after the lockdowns," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady amidst the tension, "the darkness will remind them." A chill pierced the air as she opened the box to reveal strings of delicate memories, old photographs, crumpled letters, and fragments of forgotten lives, pieces of Brookshire long lost and nearly erased from our minds. They danced and flickered in the wind, releasing a wave of whispered voices that echoed through the town, triggering every locked memory of pain, neglect, and fears we had tried to bury. As I watched in horror and fascination, I could feel the energy of the past surging through the crowd, feeding off each individual's shame, guilt, and curiosity for the life they once lived. What does this mean? I wondered, my heart racing between dread and the need for answers. The woman's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the fear evaporated. She offered a knowing smile. "Embrace it," she urged, "and decide for yourselves how to let it shape you." At that moment, I understood what had happened during those surreal nights of sharing. We had built something beautiful in the wake of darkness, a new tradition where vulnerability turned into strength. However, the stories we buried were still there, existing in the fabric of our town, yearning to be recognized. We could no longer lock down our fears nor ignore the consequences of our past. We united not just in declaring our old pain but in acknowledging it together. And so we did. In our newfound circle of acceptance and resilience, we began to share once more. The fears and sadness would not diminish our light, instead, they would guide us towards growth. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the town of Brookshire stood together, brilliant and renewed, prepared to embrace whatever lay ahead while carrying every piece of who we were beneath our shared story. The box of memories became a symbol, reminding us that while we may lock down at twilight, it was the unlocking in the light of day that truly defined our existence. There's something undeniably peculiar about the way a single conversation can shift the course of your life, a truth I discovered one rainy Wednesday while scrolling through the endless threads of Ask Reddit. The flat I rented in the heart of Chicago felt especially suffocating that evening. The sound of rain against the window accompanied my feelings of isolation, a stark contrast to the vibrant city outside that buzzed with life. As I read the post titled Ask Reddit People Who Think All These Tariffs Are Beneficial for the US, Why? I was quickly pulled in, my curiosity piqued, and as I delved further into the answers, I became absorbed in the passionate debates over the implications of tariffs on local markets. I had briefly studied economics in college before I pursued my dream of becoming a graphic designer, but I had never really understood how deeply these subjects seeped into everyday lives until I stumbled upon a furious response from a user named Stateless Hand. Stateless Hand was adamant that the tariffs were enriching our country, claiming they helped boost local manufacturing, a sentiment echoed by others who pinned their hopes on the recovery of long-forgotten industries. Infused with their fervor, memories of my parents' struggles ran through my head. They had operated a small apparel business downtown, one of those little family-run shops that fought to survive against the behemoths of fast fashion. I remembered countless evenings spent in the cramped stockroom, listening to them share dreams about a revitalized manufacturing sector buoyed by local trade. That part of my childhood felt like a treasure I had long buried beneath life's responsibilities, now rekindled, thanks to the passionate pleas on the screen before me. Intrigued, I felt compelled to respond, drafting carefully articulated thoughts over the next hour, combining facts and personal anecdotes into a single narrative. I shared my experience in my parents' shop and how tariffs could empower small businesses like theirs, but I also questioned the effectiveness of raising prices on everyday goods. To my disbelief, my comment gained traction. Users began responding to my reflections, others reached out, sharing their own stories of struggles within their communities. I felt something unfurl inside me, an unexpected connection, a sense of belonging created amid this realm of shared experiences. As the thread continued to grow, I found myself immersed in conversations that challenged my perspectives, ultimately stirring a mix of pride and fear, as I was both championing and critiquing a contentious subject I had once brushed off casually. Weeks passed as I continued engaging with the thread. Each comment felt like a thread weaving a larger tapestry of understanding and empathy, reminding me of how delicate our collective existence truly was. One comment stood out, however, a direct message from Stateless Hand, commending me for my perspective. Curious about the person behind the username, I hesitantly replied, and what unfolded next surprised me. We began exchanging daily messages, discussing everything from economics to our favorite Spotify playlists and, eventually, even personal matters. Their perspective was refreshingly grounded, as was the way they articulated the struggles they witnessed in their neck of the woods. They lived in a small town in Florida and described how the recent changes in trade policy had turned the local economy upside down, personally affecting their family's strawberry farm. Slowly, we moved from online exchanges to video calls, and I became familiar with the gentle cadence of Stateless Hand's voice, a balm on the digital abstraction that had initially defined our connection. However, I soon found myself wrestling with an unexpected dilemma. The more I saw into the eyes of the human behind the screen, the more troubled I felt by my initial stance on the tariffs. Our friendship deepened over shared lives, tales, and laughter, but every conversation also led to a struggle within me, as I felt more torn over the conflicting narratives surrounding our shared economics. In our moments together, it became clear how easily hearts could be caught between ideals and realities, especially when personal relationships began to weave themselves around such heavy topics. The tipping point came one evening as we video chatted. Stateless Hand was visibly upset, sharing how the local grocery store was about to close due to increased prices from tariffs, which had left the community desperate. My heart ached for them as I listened intently, feeling a whirlwind of emotions swirl within me. I dared to question the general consensus within our thread, measuring my words carefully out of respect for the friendship that had blossomed. Maybe, I began, my voice trembling slightly, the benefits of these tariffs aren't as straightforward as they seem. Could it harm more than it helps? A thoughtful silence filled the space between us, the storm outside echoing our unspoken fears. The conversation, which had once been light-hearted, was suddenly thrown into the depths of conflict and reflection. As the rain continued to pour, I understood that navigating disagreement was part of forging a connection, that grappling with different perspectives was an intrinsic part of understanding not only the world but also one another. In that moment of vulnerability, I recognized the importance of just listening, not to refute or defend, but to truly hear and find a common ground. Our discussions took on a new rhythm, blending our hopes and fears into a tapestry of understanding, one woven from personal stories and collective experiences. I'm not sure when it happened, but over the months that followed, the thread of our conversation transitioned from economics to sharing day-to-day moments, the silly selfie with my cat, or them showing off their latest harvest. With every photo exchange, we built a bridge, emphasizing our humanity amidst a sea of statistics and political discourse. By the time summer rolled around, I found myself planning a visit to their small town to meet face to face, the anticipation bubbling within me as the thought of witnessing what we'd spoken of for so long became a palpable reality. In the roundabout culmination of our journey, I came to realize how immensely important perspective can be. Through our tireless debates over tariffs, I found a friend, a confidant, and a way to understand the intricate connections we hold in our communities. When we eventually met, it felt as though we'd intertwined our lives in more ways than just a digital realm, but as friends sharing the weight of a world often burdened by misunderstanding. As we stood in the sun-soaked fields of their family farm, laughter echoing, I understood that no matter how much we differed, we were simply two humans trying to navigate an often daunting and tangled web of life. Walking side by side, I recognized that each unique voice, filled with its own struggles and joys, could amplify the sound of 1,000 unanswered questions, and together, we could find clarity in our shared complexities. And although I could never find a definitive answer to that mysterious original question about tariffs, I walked away with a new sense of purpose, to engage, embrace, and, above all, listen, because sometimes, it isn't about the answers we seek, but the connections we forge along the way. Update: a few months later, Stateless Hand and I are still in contact. We've become somewhat of an odd pair, a Chicago city dweller and a small-town farmer, but we share experiences and understanding that neither of us could find alone. And while discussions about local economic policies persist, those debates have shaped us into advocates for one another's narratives, a testament to how dialogue can unearth hidden treasures of empathy and friendship where least expected. It was a cool autumn day when I found myself sitting on the porch of my modest home, the remnants of summer fading and the leaves transforming into vibrant hues of gold and crimson. I clutched my phone tightly, lost in thought about my newfound friendship with Stateless Hand. Our conversations had shifted from local economic policies to something deeper, our childhoods, our dreams, and the life paths that led us to become who we are today. I always thought of myself as just an average city dweller, nestled in the comforting chaos of Chicago. But with Stateless Hand, I began to see the complexity behind the simplicity of a small-town life in the Midwest, the intimate knowledge a farmer had of the land, and how deeply rooted it was in community. Our video calls had become the highlight of my week, a lifeline that sought to connect the hustle of city life with the quietude of rural existence. This particular afternoon, I was waiting for our scheduled chat, reflecting on how our debates over tariffs had evolved. Where once we had argued over numbers and implications, we now shared stories of our families, our cultures, and the little things that made us tick. I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and a soft pang of longing curled within me, reminding me of the way connection blossomed unexpectedly. That longing was suddenly interrupted as my phone chimed, pulling me back into the present. Stateless Hand's familiar face appeared on the screen, a mix of excitement and sincerity lighting up his features. "Hey! You won't believe this," he started, his Chicago accent weaving through his words. "I've created a community garden project. It's not just for food, but to bring our town together after the division caused by the tariffs." Intrigued, I leaned forward, eager to pull from his enthusiasm. He described how local farmers had banded together, setting aside their differences about policy and focusing instead on a mutual love for fresh produce and community ties. Each member contributed seeds, labor, or time, and, through sweat and collaboration, they cultivated a patch of earth that had once sat fallow. My heart warmed with admiration. Here was a man who had taken the contentious conversations and transformed them into an initiative that spoke of healing and unity. I couldn't help but share my own thoughts, recalling the varied community events in the city that sometimes felt lost in the multitude of people. "You know," I said, "I've always felt a bit disconnected in the city. It can be hard to find that sense of belonging." Stateless Hand nodded, his gaze earnest. "Yeah, I think we all feel that sometimes. But what you're doing in Chicago, it's essential. Your city might feel crowded, but every single person there has a story worth sharing. We should host a virtual exchange, a mingling of our worlds." A spark ignited within me at the thought. It was a splendid idea. We brainstormed ways to make it happen, planning to connect both our communities through shared experiences. Some were outlandish, others mundane, but all born from genuine excitement: an online cultural fair, a recipe swap, stories from the field and city alike, weaving together our narratives. As our call wound down, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't expected. Yes, our discussions had begun with tariffs, numbers, and policies, but they had morphed into something profound. We'd become advocates for each other's worlds, bridging the distances that separate life paths. I reflected on how dialogue had been a muscle we'd flexed together, building strength and resilience through the words we exchanged. Those tariffs were now but a backdrop to a growing tapestry of friendship and mutual respect, threads of understanding woven together through laughter and shared struggles. I hung up that evening, content with my little project in mind, confident that our stories would soon intertwine in ways that had never crossed my thoughts. And thus, as the sun slipped below the horizon, I welcomed the stars, knowing that both Stateless Hand and I were on a journey defined not by policy debates but by the bonds we formed and the understanding we nurtured as we embraced the beautiful complexity of our lives. As I sprawled on my couch later that night, clutching my phone in one hand and a steaming mug of herbal tea in the other, I felt a comforting warmth settle in my chest. The glow of the screen reflected the enthusiasm I had for this newfound friendship. Stateless Hand, whose real name was Chris, was as much a contrast to my life in bustling Chicago as the endless fields of corn were to the concrete skyline I had known my whole life. Yet, in our conversations, layers began to peel back, revealing shared dreams and anxieties hidden beneath the weight of our respective realities. Chris often shared his tales of the farm, the rhythm of the seasons, the bond he formed with the land and the animals, and the highs and lows of harvests over the years. I listened intently, my mind painting vivid images of the sun-kissed fields and golden sunsets that he described, feeling a tug of envy for the simplicity and connection he embraced. I opened up about my life too, recounting the frenetic pace of city life, the thrum of impatience that lived in the hearts of my neighbors, and the solitude often carved by crowded public transport. Our conversations began to evolve into a ritual. Every Wednesday evening, we would schedule a video call, each eagerly anticipating the chance to share our lives. With each session, I realized just how deeply I appreciated Chris's perspective on things I had previously taken for granted. One week, as we spoke about the complexities of our economies, I shared my frustration about the endless barrage of news on tariffs and policies. Chris listened patiently for a moment, before gently interjecting with an idea I hadn't considered, the idea that perhaps, in every policy debate, there lies a community, voices seeking to be heard, struggles wanting to be shared. It sparked a light in me. We were both entrenched in our worlds, unaware of how much we could learn from one another. As fall wrapped its chill around Chicago, I found myself yearning to visit Chris and his small-town farm. I proposed the idea during one of our calls, watching as his face broke into a wide grin. "You'd love it here," he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "We're just harvesting pumpkins and planning for the winter months." The thought of stepping out of my urban existence and into a world where life echoed with the sounds of nature thrilled me. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus, the city shifting behind me like sand in an hourglass. I could feel the anticipation buzzing in my veins. When I finally arrived at Chris's farm, a sprawling landscape of earthy browns and golds opened before me, conjuring an awe that made me forget all the stress of my usual routine. He met me at the gate, his face beaming with enthusiasm and familiarity, as if we were old friends rather than recent acquaintances bound through screens and digital chats. We embraced, and it felt surreal. What unfolded over the next few days was a tapestry of experiences woven with genuine laughter, deep conversations, and moments of serene beauty amidst nature. I helped him in the fields, learning how to harvest pumpkins, and even got a taste of country cooking courtesy of one of his friends. Each evening, we'd sit around the fire pit, the crackling flames illuminating our faces as we reflected on the days gone by, how small-town worries mirrored city stress, how a failing crop could echo the financial struggles of an urban worker. As the visit drew to a close, I felt something shift within me, a deeper appreciation dawning. It was no longer just an exchange of ideas, it was a bridge spanning two worlds that often seemed so divergent. I realized how vital these connections were, much like the necessary nutrients in soil that help crops flourish. By engaging with Chris and his stories, my own life felt richer, expanded under the warmth of friendship. When I returned to Chicago, the city felt different. The streets were familiar, yet now, they were laced with the memories of a place that had changed me, even if just a little. A month later, I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and scrolling through my social media feed when I noticed a new post from Chris about a local farmer's market he was launching. The idea thrilled me, and without a second thought, I texted him, offering to help promote it through my connections in the city. It was the least I could do for the deep impact he had made on my life. Chris responded with the same enthusiasm, and suddenly, what began as an unusual conversation about tariffs transformed into a collaboration that intertwined our worlds even further, a chance to showcase local produce to a city that often overlooked its roots. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I can't help but feel grateful for how a mere online discussion blossomed into a real friendship, one filled with laughter, empathy, and a shared understanding that transcends our differing lifestyles. It isn't just about tariffs, policies, or who benefits more. It's about how we can find pieces of ourselves in one another, about constructing communities, no matter how different our environments may be. And while my journey with Chris doesn't solely revolve around economic debates, it's an exploration of life's deeper connections, a reminder that sometimes, it's the people we least expect who help us heal, grow, and truly see the world. As I contemplate the beautiful complexity of our lives, I cannot wait to see where this new chapter takes us, what new intersections we'll find along the way, and what other friendships may blossom as we continue to embrace the journey ahead. I've always prided myself on being a generous person, but the last few months have turned that belief on its head, and now, I find myself questioning my own values. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I had been together for just over a year when she broached the subject of her kids needing cars. Now, let me clarify, Rachel has 2 children from a previous marriage, Jenna, who is 15, and Max, who is 13. From the moment I met them, I felt an instant bond. Jenna had this fierce spirit, often caught between her childhood and looming adulthood, while Max was a whirlwind of energy, always looking to make people laugh. Sharing time with them was pure joy. Yet, as Rachel's kids got older, the conversations inevitably shifted to the need for independence. They wanted their own rides to school, friends' houses, and extracurricular activities. It was an ordinary Thursday when Rachel casually said, "You know, I've been thinking the kids really need cars to be more independent. Wouldn't it be great if we could pick something up for them?" At first, I chuckled, thinking she was joking. Surely, she didn't expect me to dive into a discussion about buying 2 cars just like that. But when I saw the look on her face, half serious, half hopeful, I realized this was no lighthearted suggestion. I could feel the knot tightening in my stomach as I recalled my own struggles. I was still paying off student loans and saving to start a life of my own. I hesitated, my mind racing through various possibilities, trying to balance my own financial responsibility with the desire to support Rachel and her family. The conversation became heated, but I remained calm. "Rachel, I love your kids, but I can't afford to buy them cars. It's just not realistic for me," I explained, choosing my words with care. She seemed taken aback, disappointment settling in her eyes. "I thought we were in this together," she said softly, and I felt an unwelcome sting of guilt. It wasn't just the idea of cars, it was the unspoken tension between a partner who wanted to share burdens and a guy who was barely keeping his head above water. Over the following weeks, the tension lingered. I noticed subtle changes in Rachel's demeanor. She became quieter, often lost in thought. On one occasion, while driving back from a family dinner, Jenna asked casually if I was going to buy them cars. I felt a sharp pang in my heart, not wanting to disappoint her but also knowing how strained my finances were. "It's complicated, Jenna," I replied, hoping to deflect. The laughter we used to share felt overshadowed by unspoken expectations and misunderstandings. Around this time, I took a hard look at myself and the relationship. I adored Rachel, and these kids meant the world to me, but it seemed I was inadvertently stepping into roles I wasn't ready for. I loved that Rachel envisioned a future where we united our families, but I had to be cautious about my own needs too. I chose to clear the air. "Rachel," I said one evening, taking her hand. "I care about you and your kids, but I also have to think about my financial goals. I'm not saying I won't help out in other ways, like giving rides or supporting them, but I can't commit to buying them cars." As I confessed my frustrations, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Rachel listened quietly, her expression shifting from disbelief to understanding. "I get it," she said finally, her voice softening. "Sometimes I forget you're still figuring things out for yourself." I could sense the relief in her voice when we turned the corner, leaving anger and disappointment behind. From that point forward, our relationship evolved. I started finding ways to help Jenna and Max without putting myself in financial jeopardy. We worked on small projects together, and I even taught them how to save up for things they wanted. Months later, I received a message from Rachel that made my heart swell. "The kids are working on their savings for cars. I think they've adopted your advice," she wrote, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of them taking initiative. As we sat together that night, reminiscing over our journey, it became clear that we had come a long way. Though my situation hadn't changed much financially, I was at peace knowing we had built a stronger bond through honesty and support. Reflecting on it all, I found comfort in the notion that relationships aren't about merely giving, they're about growing together through adversity. I had feared being seen as selfish, but in the end, what transpired reaffirmed a truth: it's important to recognize one's own limits and communicate openly. I was still part of their lives, just in a different role. And as I fell asleep that night, I felt grateful for the love we had cultivated amid uncertainty, looking forward to all the moments yet to come. Update: a few weeks later, Rachel and I sat down with Jenna and Max to discuss plans for their first car. Instead of just handing them cash, we organized a small family project, painting and refurbishing an old car Rachel's parents had. The kids were ecstatic and learned invaluable skills throughout the process. Watching them work on something they could own ignited a sense of pride in them, but more importantly, it strengthened our bond as a family. In the end, it was about much more than just the cars. It was a lesson in responsibility, independence, and support that we would all carry forward. As the days turned into weeks, our little project blossomed into something more than just a car refurbishment. It became a way for Jenna and Max to understand the value of hard work and teamwork, lessons that would follow them into adulthood. The garage was filled with a blend of laughter and the occasional argument over color choices, tools, and who was in charge of what task. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, feeling like a part of something bigger as I watched Rachel cheer them on, wiping her hands on an old rag and beaming with pride. One Saturday, I suggested that we decorate the trunk with positive affirmations. Each kid could choose a quote that inspired them. Jenna picked "Believe in yourself," while Max, still a bit of a jokester, went with I fixed it, so I own it. Rachel and I scrambled to find some old paint and brushes, and soon the trunk of the car emblazoned with their chosen words became a family masterpiece. The act of creating something that was truly theirs, a canvas on wheels, made Jenna and Max light up in ways that store-bought gifts never could. I remember one afternoon, after splashing paint around and making ridiculous faces while trying to channel my inner artist, Jenna turned to me with her bright blue eyes shining. "Will you help us do this again someday?" she asked, her voice earnest. I nodded, caught up in the moment. "Absolutely. This can be the first of many projects. We'll build cars, tree houses, or even go-karts, whatever you can think of." The commitment struck me as I spoke, the weight of my words settled in my chest, but it also felt electric, like I was weaving threads into our growing fabric of family. As the weeks continued to pass, we worked diligently, putting in time every weekend, replacing parts, and learning about the engine. I took on the heavier, more technical parts while Rachel guided the kids through the finer points of sanding and painting. Each task was a chance for Jenna and Max to ask questions, and for us to share stories of our own youthful follies, like the time I managed to get my first car stuck in a mud pit because I thought four-wheel drive meant you could drive anywhere. One evening, while we cleaned up after a particularly messy painting session, I was surprised to see a glimmer of uncertainty appear in Jenna's eyes. She had always been the more confident of the two, but tonight, something was off. "Are we doing it wrong?" she muttered, glancing at the splatters of paint that dotted the ground, some bold strokes that had landed on her shirt. It struck me then just how important this whole experience was to her. If the car didn't turn out perfect, would that mean we had failed some unspoken test? I knelt down beside her, resting my arms on my knees. "What do you think?" I asked gently. "Does it feel like we're working together? Are you having fun?" She frowned for a moment, staring at the paint on her shirt and considering. "Yeah, but the car needs to look perfect." "Jenna," I said softly, "life isn't about being perfect. It's about learning, growing, and having fun along the way." I watched as the words sank in, her expression slowly shifting toward relief and understanding, like the clouds lifting after a storm. Finally, the day came when we would unveil the refurbished car. We had all worked tirelessly, and the anticipation electrified the air as we gathered in the driveway for the big reveal. The sun shone down, catching the bright colors that adorned the car's surface in a way that made it look almost magical. Rachel stood beside me, her hand clasped in mine, her eyes glistening with excitement. Jenna and Max stood in front of the vehicle, their faces a mixture of disbelief and sheer joy, and as they reached out to touch their creation, I felt a surge of pride that ran deeper than I expected. Jenna joined Max in jumping up and down, squealing with happiness, and Rachel and I exchanged a glance, a silent confirmation of what we had built together, not just in terms of the car but within our family unit. I knew this was a moment they would remember, a fragment of time marked by laughter, creativity, and the unwavering bond we shared. Later, as we took turns behind the wheel on a quiet street, what struck me wasn't just the shiny paint or the engine purring, it was the way Jenna and Max discussed their plans for their driving future, each word a reflection of their blossoming maturity and sense of responsibility. I couldn't help but smile, thinking back to the conflict I had initially faced regarding whether or not I should buy them cars. The struggle had been real, but what we gained was immeasurable. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. In teaching them the value of ownership and effort, I found that I was learning alongside them. Suddenly, our pastime projections morphed into a bonding experience, a way for Rachel and I to not only build cars but to build a family, brick by cherished brick. A week later, I received a message from an old coworker who wanted to update me about a job opening. The idea of returning to work jostled around in my brain, but I barely thought about it. Something deeper was stirring within me. The realization that I didn't need a high-paying job to feel fulfilled came to me like a whisper. I had discovered a different way to be present, engaged, and genuinely happy. Although our yard was filled with laughter from our car projects, I had also conjured an understanding that family was not just defined by blood, but by the memories we created together. Several months later, as our car adventures continued to unfold, Jenna and Max decided they wanted to do something special for Rachel and me. One afternoon, they surprised us with a picnic in the park, complete with sandwiches and homemade cookies that had some very creative, but slightly chaotic icing. We laughed as they took charge of the basket, and as we settled down beneath a tree, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As I watched the kids run around, their laughter a melody of joy, I realized that I would never trade these moments for material things. I might not have given them cars without conditions at first, but I had given them the tools to navigate life more effectively, which would prove to be far more valuable in the long run. Reflecting on everything, I realized that though my initial hesitation stemmed from wanting to be a responsible adult rather than a flashy type, it had led to something far more profound, and although I would probably always be the one saying, "Let's paint the trunk," I had also become the dad who could tell a joke, share genuine pieces of wisdom, and make memories that would last a lifetime. Sometimes, I would hear Jenna and Max reminiscing about our adventures, and I couldn't help but feel that we were building not just a family of the future but a legacy, one filled not just with cars but with the cherished stories of our lives. As the days passed, our weekends became filled with laughter, paint splatters, and the smell of motor oil, a unique blend of chaos and joy that transformed our garage into a makeshift workshop and a haven for memories. Rachel would often send me gentle nudges of encouragement as I attempted to wield a wrench while Jenna and Max handled the power tools with surprising finesse. Each time they'd succeed in fastening a bolt or sanding down a rough edge, their smiles would widen, the joy resonating in their eyes as if they'd just conquered a mountain. These moments were powerful reminders of how quickly they were growing up, and each project fueled my desire to be more present and supportive in their lives. One evening, as dusk began to settle in, we found ourselves sprawled out on an old blanket we'd tossed in the trunk while we waited for paint to dry. The kids shared their dreams. Jenna wanted to travel the world and write stories of her adventures, while Max, always the jokester, mused about becoming a famous comedian. As I listened, I realized that this experience was about more than just cars. It was forging a foundation for their ambitions and aspirations. Weeks later, the old car began to transform. It was no longer just a rusted frame. It became a vibrant representation of teamwork, laughter, and shared sweat. We painted it in bold blues and cheerful yellows, mixing colors as if each swirl of paint was a thread in the tapestry of our newly formed family. Friends and neighbors stopped by, often asking if they could lend a hand, turning our small project into a community affair. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids and I painted the hood, Rachel appeared with freshly baked cookies, and her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched us. I felt a warmth in my chest knowing that I was no longer just a boyfriend to her. I had evolved into a partner and a father figure, nurturing the lives around me with kindness, patience, and a whole lot of love. When the project finally reached completion, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The day we unveiled the finished car was nothing short of magical. Jenna and Max jumped up and down, their faces lit with astonished delight as we took a family picture beside the newly restored vehicle. However, with this joy came an underlying anxiety rooted in my mind. Would they expect the same kind of effort and commitment forever? What if life became too busy, or what if the bond we had nurtured began to unravel? I discussed these uncertainties with Rachel one quiet evening when the kids were snugly tucked in. We illuminated the room with soft light, a warm cup of tea in hand, and she shared a reassuring sentiment. "It's normal to worry," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "But remember, it's not about the cars or the crafts. It's about creating a space where they feel valued and supported, whether it's with paintbrushes or just by listening to their hopes. They'll remember the love, not just the projects." Her words resonated deep within me, and I realized she was right. These kids, Jenna and Max, were resilient and adaptive, just as life would need them to be. My role wasn't to guarantee a perfect scenario constantly but rather to be their constant support through life's uncertainties. As days turned to months, I witnessed their confidence blossom, not just in their abilities with mechanics but also in their schoolwork and friendships. They naturally began taking leadership roles among their classmates, eagerly engaging in school projects. Each time they tackled a new challenge, I felt a surge of pride that they might carry the values we cultivated through our weekend car projects into the rest of their lives, providing a sense of direction only strengthened by the love we built together. Reflecting on this journey, I found clarity in accepting my title as dad in their lives, embracing the role with open arms. As winter approached, and car maintenance became less frequent, we shifted our focus to indoor projects. Jigsaw puzzles and game nights filled the house with energy. The old car stood proudly outside, an emblem of our collective achievements and the dawning of a familial bond that felt everlasting. I often pondered the future but found comfort in knowing that our legacy would consist of more than material objects. It would be woven with the stories of resilience, compassion, and unwavering support that would carry us through any trials that lay ahead. Update: fast forward several years, and the old car became a treasured memento. Jenna and Max took it to prom with their friends, painted stars on the roof, and filled it with memories I knew would last them a lifetime. And as Rachel and I watched them drive off into the night, Her hands securely clasped in mine, I felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment, good and bad, that had brought us here, a beautifully imperfect family, ready to face the world together, one adventure at a time. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care. Who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience, or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, What we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered, I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward: I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, He learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight. Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. It started as a normal Tuesday morning, the kind where you barely have time to sip your coffee before racing out the door for work. My job at a modest tech company in Seattle had become my routine. I was programmed to rise, work, and repeat, barely catching my breath in between. It was a dreary day, the clouds thick with the promise of rain, and I settled into my chair beneath the fluorescent lights, half listening to my coworkers' banter about the latest game release and plans for the weekend. That was when it happened, a sudden, loud buzz originating from all our screens, followed by the words flashing in bold, uppercase letters, "Hide." I looked around, stunned. My boss, usually the calm in any storm, froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide. A collective murmur spread like wildfire through the office as coworkers pulled out their phones only to find the same message plastered across social media, news apps, even our personal devices. Panic began to seep in, that creeping sense of dread rooted deep within my gut, as people scrambled to understand what was happening. I live alone, and my thoughts instantly drifted to my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly woman who often relied on my borrowed sugar and occasional help with her garden. After a few moments of confusion, I found myself racing up the stairs, urgency propelling my movements. By the time I knocked on her door, I was shaking. I had already mentally rehearsed a myriad of possibilities. Was this a prank? A glitch? I heard shuffling from inside, followed by her croaky voice beckoning me to enter. Dropping my fear like a heavy coat on the rack, I stepped into her dimly lit apartment. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, a feeble attempt to mask the cooking smells from the night before. Mrs. Hargrove was seated on her threadbare couch, clutching her knitting needles like a lifeline. "Did you hear it, too?" she asked, eyes darting to the window as if the world outside would provide answers. We turned on the television, and the news broadcasters, usually so composed, were stumbling over their words, repeating the message, advising people to stay indoors, turn off their lights, and remain quiet. An inexplicable fear rippled through me. We sat together in comfortable silence, knitted tightly by the uncertainty of the moment, only the occasional crackle of the TV filling the void. My hand found hers, Her warmth was a small comfort against the cold that crept into my bones. Hours passed, but the message remained, echoing in my mind, urging everyone to hide. I thought of how many times I'd taken her for granted, how our chats of mundane things, weather and gardening, had become my escape. We were two souls lost in an inexplicable moment, clinging to each other for reassurance even as her fear morphed into something deeper. As the sun began to set, shrouding the room in shadows, my phone buzzed insistently. Notifications continued to pile up. I glanced at the screen. To my astonishment, the message had changed. It now read, "Doubt leads to vulnerability. Remain silent." With a chill, I looked at Mrs. Hargrove, whose hand was now tightening around mine, her eyes wide. "What does it mean?" I whispered, the question heavy with unsaid fears. She merely shrugged, her gaze flickering towards the flickering television, now filled with static. Then, just as quickly as the chaos had begun, it was gone. The screens turned blank, the world outside returned to its untroubled state, yet we sat, entangled in each other's worry, stunned silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. The next morning brought no clarity, we had not slept a wink, the tension of those hours weighing on our hearts like lead. As we emerged from our hiding, both bewildered and exhausted, I found the streets oddly sterile, the people moving through their routines with a peculiar detachment, almost as if they'd decided together to forget that one insidious message. My mind raced back to the uncertainty of that night, and a secret buried deep within me began to unfurl. The event had acted like a mirror, reflecting my own hidden fears, not for my life but for the connections I had taken so lightly. Mrs. Hargrove and I soon became inseparable. Our shared experience forged an unspoken pact, binding us together in our quiet sanctuary. As mundane as the days turned, I never went a day without checking in, ensuring she was well. It seemed that, in those moments of fear, I had found something truly precious, a friendship built from vulnerability, long evenings spent sipping tea and knitting, exchanging stories that reminded me of the beauty hidden within the everyday. And every now and then, when the shadows started closing in and the world felt too loud, I'd catch myself glancing at the windows, half wondering if the screens would ignite again, awakening the part of us that we'd left behind. Months passed, and just as I began to feel entirely at home in my newfound reality, I received a notification on my phone one evening, a message from somewhere unknown. Scrolling past the usual mundane alerts, my heart raced as my eyes locked onto the words flickering across the screen, "It's not over." In that moment, the cozy blanket of comfort that had enveloped my days peeled away, exposing me to the chill of uncertainty once more, and the thought echoed in my mind, what exactly was lurking in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to strike? Now, it wasn't the screens I feared. It was my own heart, wondering if it had been bold enough to open itself up once again or if the next message would tell me to hide, again. The days that followed were punctuated by a strange mixture of paranoia and nostalgia. I often found myself staring at my phone, waiting for another message to flicker across my screen, as if it would somehow provide clarity in the whirlwind of confusion that had engulfed my thoughts. The sense of foreboding clung to me like a ghost, whispering reminders of the darkness that had nearly consumed me before, a darkness I thought I'd escaped. I had opened up to my closest friend, Lily, a few months back about my struggles, how a year-long battle with anxiety had left me feeling shackled within my own mind. It was thrilling to finally share my burden, yet with every confession, I felt that I'd pushed her away, entangling her in my turmoil. She would often tell me it was brave to be vulnerable, yet my heart ached for the distance I imagined between us. Those late-night conversations over steaming cups of chamomile did fill the cracks in my soul, yet as dread seeped in again, I wondered if any breakthrough was truly positive. The messages hadn't just stirred fear, they unearthed old wounds, like a physician ripping off a bandage that had long since bonded with skin, leaving the tender flesh exposed and raw. Whenever Lily would check in, her texts were laced with a delicate balance of concern and cheerfulness that made my heart ache for the carefree days we once shared. Deep down, I wondered if I could muster the courage to tell her how the recent turn of events had reopened those emotions, and in a way, placed a wedge between us, a wedge invisible to her but painfully evident to me. One evening, just as the sky turned from a pale blue to a soft bruised purple, I found myself scrolling through old photos to stave off the rising anxiety. Images of laughter and impromptu adventures formed a tapestry of trust that felt almost foreign now. I stumbled upon a snapshot of us at the beach, Lily with her wild curls dancing in the wind, her laughter ringing like a melody that I could still hear faintly in the air. It was beautiful, and it temporarily dulled the chaotic thoughts racing in my mind. Yet, a sudden ping from my phone yanked me back to reality, and I instinctively glanced down to see that the ominous message had reappeared, just like it had before: hide. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat prickle along my skin. In that moment, it wasn't the words that chilled me, it was the implication that whatever was sending these messages had returned, and this time, it was looking for more than just my attention. Feeling desperate, I called Lily, my heart pounding with a blend of dread and hope. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a soft balm to my frayed nerves. I hesitated, the familiar anxiety clawing its way back, but I could feel her unwavering concern wrapping around me like a safety net. "No, it isn't," I finally admitted. And as I spilled my soul, describing the messages and the weight of my fear, a part of me feared she'd brush it off, that she'd think I was being melodramatic. Instead, she listened, unwavering. After a long silence, Lily replied softly, "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone in this." Just hearing her say that made a warmth bloom in my chest. Perhaps I had misjudged our connection, believing the heaviness in my heart had dimmed my light enough to distance us. But there. She was, steadfast and true, reminding me that not all shadows had to be faced alone. Over the next few days, we navigated this precarious situation together. We dived into threads of conversation, piecing together the cryptic messages that seemed to proliferate overnight. Lily encouraged me to document each one, treating them as clues in a puzzle. As we turned our fears into a project, our bond grew stronger. We spent nights on the phone, diving into the mystery, allowing it to infuse a sense of purpose that we both desperately craved. And then, one fateful night, as I lay in bed flipping through the accumulated screenshots, ready to drift into sleep, something unprecedented happened. My screen lit up, and the words that gripped my heart broke like the dawn cracking through the dark: hide. But not from what you think. Confusion swirled through me, the word but felt like a key unlocking something deeper. Hiding from what? Suddenly the messages felt less like threats and more like a guiding hand, steering me toward something unknown. As I filled with determination, I snapped a photo of the screen and sent it to Lily, who replied almost instantly, fired with excitement rather than fear. "It's a clue. We need to figure out what this means." There was a long pause on my end as I considered the implications. What if this was the turning point? What if whatever darkness had clung to me now had turned itself into a riddle, daring us to explore rather than cower? As we brainstormed possible meanings, an idea began to take shape in my mind, a quirky venture through local urban legends, a path that could lead to scattered pieces of the puzzle hidden throughout our town. The notion that the world wasn't just void of shadows, but also alive with the stories of others, breathed a sense of exhilaration into my soul. We had started something larger than ourselves, twisting dread into a shared adventure and recalibrating our relationship with each word we scrawled over old maps, feeling like true detectives across a mosaic of vibrant stories waiting to be unveiled. Perhaps I was slowly embracing the shadows, not as a harbinger of despair, but as a canvas upon which new experiences could be painted. The messages weren't just warnings, at least, not entirely. They became gateways to an old friend and a reminder that even when darkness loomed, there was light to be found in unity, adventure, and courage. And as I shut my eyes that night, I held onto that thought, the thrill of the unknown blossoming within me, not as a threat but as an invitation, a chance to rewrite our story together, one hidden message at a time. The next morning greeted me with a hesitant light creeping through the curtains, softening the edges of the trepidation still clinging to me like a heavy mist. Instinctively, I reached for my phone, half expecting another cryptic message waiting for me, but this time there was nothing, just the dull maintenance of my usual notifications. The absence of alert from the screens around me felt oddly louder than any of the messages I had previously seen. As my caffeine-fueled thoughts began to swirl, I considered how I would address Lucy. She had been a pillar of strength throughout this bizarre ordeal, sharing her own fears and curiosities with me over late-night cups of tea. Together, we had spent countless hours unraveling the mysteries woven into those chilling notifications, our conversations bridging the gap between the surreal and the rational. "It's not over," I whispered to myself, a confession of my lingering anxieties, as I prepared to head to her apartment for our usual Saturday brunch ritual. The sun had risen to its rightful place in the sky, but a nagging sense of foreboding remained, reminding me that beneath the tranquil surface, there was an unsettling current waiting just to be recognized. When I arrived, Lucy was already seated at the table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug as she gazed out at the colorful leaves dancing in the autumn breeze. There was a look of pensive serenity on her face, and for the briefest moment, I wished I could share that calmness. But as I slid into the chair across from her, I could feel the weight of the past few days clash against the warmth of her smile. "Hey, you," she said, her voice bright, "I was just thinking about how wild it was that we both got the same notification last night. Did you freak out too?" A laugh bubbled up from my throat that was more nervous than amused, yet I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "It's crazy, right? I mean, not just what it said, but how it makes you feel, like we're being roped into something much bigger than ourselves," I replied, glimpsing the unease that lurked behind her smile. With each shared moment, each comforting caress of friendship, I began to lose some of the tension that had tightened its grip on my chest. Over pancakes drizzled in syrup and steaming cups of tea, we ventured deeper into discussions about the messages, what they could possibly mean and how they seemed to weave in and out of our lives, like a narrative tether tying us both to something greater. The hours rolled by, merging laughter with serious contemplations, as we mapped out a series of possibilities. By the time we finished our brunch, a plan had begun to form, an exploration we were both willing to embark on. We would confront this strange phenomenon together, stepping beyond the comfort of our homes into the realm of the unknown, equipped only with our wits, a shared sense of adventure, and the lingering warmth of our connection. In the days that followed, we gathered intel, combed through our social media feeds for clues, and reached out to others who had experienced similar eerie messages, weaving a network of support that spanned far wider than we anticipated. Then one evening, as twilight wrapped the world in a shimmering whiff of mystery, we received a different kind of message. This one appeared on our phones with an urgency that pulled at the beads of fear and excitement strung within us. "Find the light." My heart raced at the implications. What did it mean, finding light? Was it a physical location or a metaphorical endeavor? Both Lucy and I felt the thrill of plunging into uncharted territory, an adventure where we would become co-authors of the story the universe had chosen to share with us. We centralized our efforts to the town's old library, a labyrinth of dusty tomes and forgotten relics that had fostered many youthful imaginations. There, beneath the worn shelves, countless lives had intersected with stories that lingered in the margins, a serene backdrop for our quest. I wandered into the musty aisles brimming with nostalgia, trying to interpret the message as I climbed the well-worn wooden stepladder toward a collection of novels hidden high above the lesser-explored stacks. It was a slow and meaningful search, our hearts synchronized, tinged with an understanding that what we sought wasn't just an answer but a piece of ourselves amidst the chaos. It was Lucy who discovered it first, a small brass lamp hidden behind a thick volume of poetry, retreating silently from the world but undeniably beckoning us to turn it on. As the electricity coursed through its threads, a warm golden hue expelled shadows from the corners of the library, melting them away like whispers in the night. And it was in that light, amidst the stacks surrounding us like an embrace, that we felt a pulse of reassurance thrumming through our hearts. The messages had never been solely about warnings or reminders to hide, they had been guiding us toward the light, the very essence of connection, friendship, and courage to face whatever lay ahead. As I stood there, my fears unfurling like dried leaves in the breeze, I turned to Lucy, whose smile sparkled brighter than any flickering screen. We were no longer simply ghostly passengers caught in the web of fear, we had woven ourselves into a vibrant tapestry of camaraderie, ready to face whatever mysteries awaited us. The realization struck me profoundly, and as I closed my eyes in gratitude for her presence, I understood that this was just the beginning of a new adventure, a chance to embrace the unknown together, not as separate entities but as two hearts, one journey, united under the gentle warmth of the light we had found. In the days that followed, the world outside continued its rhythm, blissfully unaware of the small spark of light we had ignited in our own lives. I often felt the thrill of messages flickering across screens, but now they were no longer sentences of fear. Instead, they transformed into whispers of adventure, encouraging exploration anew. Perhaps the forthcoming challenges would come with shadows, but armed with the knowledge that even darkness could illuminate paths yet unknown, I felt more than ready. And with Lucy beside me, I realized we were not merely searching for answers. We were crafting a narrative of resilience and hope, one that welcomed and embraced the shadows, because sometimes, it was within those dark corners that the flickers of light just waited to be found. As I nestled down on that soothing evening, the comfort of the day wrapping around me like a tender embrace, my heart no longer raced with uncertainty. Instead, it thrummed steadily in a newfound harmony, a gentle cadence whispering that whatever came next would be worth every step taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next message would not carry an admonition to hide but an invitation to explore, breathe, and embrace this beautiful tapestry of existence we continued to weave together. Every night, without fail, the air would grow thick with a heavy silence at precisely 10:52 p.m., as if the world had pressed pause on itself. Living in a small town like Brookshire, this unnerving ritual was an accepted part of life, a peculiar tradition that I had come to know for as long as I could remember. I would watch the clock tick down from my bedroom window, the cool moonlight casting long shadows across my floor, the only sound being the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. It was strange, really, how nobody ever spoke about it, not even in whispers. My parents never bothered to explain why every household, every shop, and even the streetlights would dim or flicker for 12 minutes each night, as if the entire town was collectively holding its breath. I often found myself puzzled, torn between my curiosity and an inexplicable instinct to just let it be, to let it weave itself into the fabric of my life like a long-held family secret. But that fateful summer night, curiosity won, fueled by a restless spirit and an idea that maybe, just maybe, I could peek behind the curtain of this nightly mystery that had haunted me. As I stitched together my plan, the thrill of uncovering a long-buried secret coursed through me like electricity, making my heart race with each passing second toward midnight. Armed with a flashlight and an insatiable need for answers, I slipped out of my room, careful not to disturb my sleeping parents. I stepped onto the cobblestone street, the night air crisp against my skin as I ventured down my familiar lane. I felt the familiar thrill of danger tingling along my spine, but I was fueled by purpose now. My best friend Jacob had always said that fear itself was just an illusion, a construct of the mind to keep us inside neatly wrapped boxes. Tonight, I was stepping out of mine, determined to find out what happened when the clock struck 11. As I approached the town square, I noticed the stillness, the shops darkened and locked, the park benches empty under the blanket of night. My pulse quickened. I had never been this close to the heart of the town during a lockdown. At 10:58, I ducked behind a large oak tree, its gnarled branches dipping low like bent old men in conversation. I could see the glow of the clock tower illuminating the street in soft gold, casting everything in a surreal haze. Then, suddenly, at 10:59, a wave of tension swept through the air, and the familiar flickering began. The town inhaled deeply, and I felt the breath of it rush past me, a wild wind rising but with no sound to accompany it. At 11 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. I held my breath, straining to see beyond the shadows where the flickering flickered out entirely, leaving only the oppressive darkness draping over Brookshire. My flashlight's beam seemed feeble in comparison as I scanned my surroundings. Then I saw them, figures emerging slowly from every corner, gathering under the clock tower, their silhouettes merging and morphing into one another like the whispers of ghosts in the night. It was then that I realized the truth of the lockdown. They weren't ordinary townsfolk. They were different. They moved with a deliberate grace that sent chills running down my spine. As I stared in wide-eyed awe, I recognized familiar faces amongst the crowd, my neighbors, the shop owners, even the mailman, yet they wore strange expressions, devoid of any feeling I had ever associated with them. They seemed entranced, their eyes glossed over as they collectively shifted in rhythm, their bodies swaying as if conducting an invisible orchestra. I instinctively backed away, heart pounding in my ears, when I bumped into something solid, a single figure cloaked in dark fabric, its features obscured. I opened my mouth to scream, but panic paralyzed me, turning my voice to stone. That's when the figure leaned closer, a voice like gravel whispering, "If you want to know the truth, you must listen." The world around me melted into whispers, their secrets flying through the air, weaving tales of ancient pacts and sacrifices made to protect the town from the darkness beyond the edge of our small universe. Each night served as a mechanism of renewal, a moment to reinforce the bond between the town and whatever lurked outside our perimeter, a reminder of the fear that kept us all safe. Each of the 12 minutes before midnight allowed the townsfolk to offer up their fears, their regrets, to the void beyond. They would carry the weight of it while, for 12 minutes, Brookshire reclaimed its peace. As the clock struck 11 and the shadows began to disperse, everything settled into an eerie tranquility. I felt the oppressive weight of understanding settle over me like a shroud. I had learned something no one else had spoken aloud, a truth that forced me to see my home in a startling new light. I slipped away, my heart racing as I retraced my steps in the quiet night. By the time I was safely back in my room, shame washed over me. I realized that in seeking the truth, I had stepped away from the comforting lies that had woven the town together. I lay awake long after the clock had chimed again, the town clutching its secrets tight. What would I do with this knowledge? That night, for the first time, I understood the weight of my neighbors' silent burdens, and the following days felt different. I walked the streets of Brookshire with a growing sense of unease, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and yet so very right about the ritual that I had once found absurd. The updates to my daily life became riddled with reminders of that fateful night, the slight nods from shopkeepers, the knowing smiles from those who had participated willingly, and in those moments, I grappled with the choice between ignorance and understanding. Months passed, and though I hadn't shared this experience with a single soul, I noticed the town changing subtly. The conversations felt deeper, the laughter more genuine, as if we were all carrying the weight of knowledge with us. I pondered often, should I tell someone? Could sharing do more harm than good? In the end, I decided it was wisdom best left as a quiet companion, a ghost story of sorts, a tale that shaped my framework of perception about our collective existence and the invisible lines we draw to stay safe, because perhaps not all knowledge is meant to comfort. And each night, as the clock struck 10:52 and the town would lock down, I would breathe deep, thanking the universe for the moment I had taken a leap beyond the known, and into the deeper layers of what life in Brookshire truly meant. As the clock struck 10:52 every night, a sense of calm and acceptance settled over me, a warm blanket in the chilly embrace of the unknown. The routine had become an intricate part of my life in Brookshire, a place that often felt like a quaint postcard from the past, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Yet, as the siren wailed and the town fell silent around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was perched upon the edge of a precipice, gazing down into shadows that danced just out of sight. The first time I had experienced the lockdown, the eerie stillness that enveloped the streets, had been surreal. I was at a late-night study session with friends, the weight of midterms hanging heavy, our laughter spilling into the soft glow of the cafe's neon lights. Suddenly, the cheerful chatter was silenced by that haunting wail, and the cafe owner, a man with kindly eyes and a perpetual smile, turned off the main lights. "Don't worry, it will be over in just 12 minutes, he assured us, but the way his voice trembled slightly as he said it sent a chill down my spine. That first evening, curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly happen during those 12 minutes that required our town to lock down every night? I began to dig deeper, asking friends and neighbors, weaving through rumors and anecdotes, a silent detective with no plan beyond satiating my curiosity. Most, it seemed, had long since accepted the routine. It was a part of life in Brookshire, whispered about but never dissected. Still, I was undeterred, driven by an insatiable urge to uncover the truth, to reveal the hidden stories tucked between the seams of our town's fabric. Nights turned into weeks, and I collected stories that spoke of strange occurrences, muffled sounds echoing through the air, flickering lights, and sometimes, faint reflections in the windows that vanished when looked upon directly. But no one ever spoke about what lay behind those 12 minutes. Perhaps I was foolish, but I felt a peculiar sense of connection to whatever secret lingered in the shadows. It wasn't until one fateful night that I stumbled upon an old journal hidden in the attic of my grandmother's long-abandoned house. The journal belonged to a distant relative, a woman who had been deemed an outsider in our town decades ago, a name whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. As I flipped through its fragile pages, I felt her despair, her isolation echoing through the years. She wrote of a darkness that had encroached upon Brookshire, a darkness that could not be spoken of openly yet haunted the town's collective memory. Her words were cryptic, but they painted a chilling picture of the past, filled with a sense of foreboding that mirrored my unease. Each passage spoke of the loud sirens, a warning of sorts, summoning the townsfolk to protect themselves from what lay beyond the safety of their homes. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized this journal, once a neglected artifact, now pulsed with urgency, as if the weight of history was begging for acknowledgement. The next evening, I felt compelled to share everything I had learned with the town council, a handful of reluctant faces gathered in the community hall. I presented my findings, my heart racing with the fear of rejection, of being branded the town's nouveau conspiracy theorist. Surprisingly, a gentle murmur rolled through the room, people shifted uneasily in their seats but listened. It was then that Mrs. Haddock, my high school history teacher now with silver streaks winding through her hair, spoke up, her voice a soft echo against the walls. The lockdowns were initially a precaution, she admitted, back when strange things began happening, children going missing, strange lights in the woods. We created protocols, trying to keep fear at bay. The air thickened with unsaid words, the fear we'd all been harboring surged to the surface. It became clear, amid the muted gasps and shifting murmurs, that we had all felt the tremors of something lurking, something unwelcome, and in trying to shield our community, we had silenced the very whispers that could have liberated us. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes weary. "My daughter went missing during the lockdown 3 years ago," she confessed, voice trembling. "I just thought it was all a coincidence, a sad part of life, but it was never discussed. All we did was follow orders. In that moment, I felt the weight of the town's collective guilt, a shared complicity in shielding ourselves from the dark while allowing it to infiltrate our lives through silence. I understood, finally, that the knowledge we held wasn't just a burden, it was a catalyst for change. Over the following weeks, I wrote to each of my neighbors, shared stories, opened channels of communication, and we began to speak, not in fear, but with hope. The 12 minutes became a platform for healing. We marked that time by uniting, creating rituals of remembrance for the lost, a declaration that we would not let history repeat itself. It was empowering to reclaim our narrative, to turn shadows into light, and slowly, the sirens transformed from dreadful reminders into signals of resilience. I began to realize that, sometimes, tearing down the walls we build was necessary, not just for our peace of mind but for the collective heart of a town that had been silenced too long. And as night fell and the sirens rang true, I joined my neighbors on the front porch, sharing our stories, reclaiming our past, and building a future free from the chains of dark whispers. The fear transformed into a gentle solidarity, as recognition settled in. That night, as the clock struck 10:52, I took a deep breath, allowing gratitude to wash over me, not just for the truth revealed, but for each soul that dared to be vulnerable, to share a story, to embrace the discomfort that eventually led to our coming together. Little did I realize that this was just the beginning. The nights that followed unfolded with a surprising cadence of trust and connection. Every 10:52 brought with it not just the sound of the sirens marking the lockdown, but the unmistakable sense of unity that had been forged in our shared vulnerability. Each evening, more families joined us on the porch, stories flowing like warm honey, sticky and sweet, their narratives intertwining with one another, creating a tapestry of lives colored by hardship, resilience, and kinship. We spoke of old neighbors long forgotten, of the eccentricities that once defined our small town, and of the chilling events that led to our customs, each revelation a thread pulling tighter around our community, stitching the fabric of Brookshire back together. I discovered Mrs. Thompson had once been a gifted violinist, performing with a local symphony before the lockdown enforced her seclusion, and I encouraged her to play once again. The mournful notes she produced carried a haunting beauty that seemed to echo our past sorrows while beckoning hope towards the future. But it wasn't only the adults who found their voices, even the children, who had previously been hushed by the fatigue of our town's rumors, began to share their dreams and fear, whispers of monsters under their beds emerging lightheartedly transformed into shadows of the unknown that haunted us all. As the days slipped by, I watched the essence of Brookshire metamorphose. The self-imposed barriers that once shackled us fell away, replaced by a sense of belonging that filled the gaps of our lives. Neighbors ventured away from their homes after the lockdowns were lifted, engaging in spontaneous community events. I found myself enveloped in this whirlwind of rekindled friendship, revitalizing not just our town but also my sense of purpose. One chilly evening, after another night of storytelling, we decided to shift the lockdown. Rather than retreating behind closed doors at 10:52, we would share a meal, a simple gathering to acknowledge the passage of time and the strength we had collectively developed. So Friday became our unity night. Candles flickered on tables sprawled end to end across Main Street, laughter mingled with the lingering silence of the sirens that would still wail, serving as a reminder of what we once faced, but also of how far we had come. However, as the weeks rolled into months, I started to feel a peculiar tug at my heart, a flutter of unresolved tension that I couldn't quite place. Every so often, I'd catch fleeting glances of unease hidden beneath the smiles shared over meals. I noticed that each night, some families still chose to stay behind locked doors, as if they held fast to an instinct that warned them not to fully embrace this newfound peace. One night, a particularly fierce storm battered Brookshire, and the sirens howled through the air, mirroring the thunder above. The lights flickered, and after a moment of hesitation, our gathering dispersed, people reluctant but ultimately retreating to the safety of their homes. Little did I know, as I settled into bed that evening, that my fleeting concerns were about to crystallize into something far more real. The next morning, just before dawn's light began to spill across the horizon, a frantic knock on my door jolted me awake. It was Mr. Holloway, the town's old librarian, who looked pale and shaken. He gasped for breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he beckoned me outside. "It's happening again," he said, "you have to see." We hurried down the street, following the shadows of our neighbors emerging from their homes, all us drawn together by a mutual fear. The streets of Brookshire felt like a haunted morning, mournful and heavy. As I stepped outside, the atmosphere shimmered with something otherworldly. Our community gathered at the center of town in wide-eyed confusion, murmurs of disbelief echoing the early mist. Then it came, a sudden and powerful shift in the air as a figure appeared at the edge of Ellis Park, bathed in the gray light of dawn. It was an old woman, her face weathered with lines wrapping around cautious blue eyes, an aura that tugged at something deep within me. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a large, brightly painted box adorned with swirling designs reminiscent of the stories we had been sharing. When the townsfolk forget the darkness that comes after the lockdowns, she called out, her voice surprisingly steady amidst the tension, the darkness will remind them. A chill pierced the air as she opened the box to reveal strings of delicate memories, old photographs, crumpled letters, and fragments of forgotten lives, pieces of Brookshire long lost and nearly erased from our minds. They danced and flickered in the wind, releasing a wave of whispered voices that echoed through the town, triggering every locked memory of pain, neglect, and fears we had tried to bury. As I watched in horror and fascination, I could feel the energy of the past surging through the crowd, feeding off each individual's shame, guilt, and curiosity for the life they once lived. What does this mean? I wondered, my heart racing between dread and the need for answers. The woman's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the fear evaporated. She offered a knowing smile. Embrace it, she urged, and decide for yourselves how to let it shape you. At that moment, I understood what had happened during those surreal nights of sharing. We had built something beautiful in the wake of darkness, a new tradition where vulnerability turned into strength. However, the stories we buried were still there, existing in the fabric of our town, yearning to be recognized. We could no longer lock down our fears nor ignore the consequences of our past. We united not just in declaring our old pain but in acknowledging it together. And so we did. In our newfound circle of acceptance and resilience, we began to share once more. The fears and sadness would not diminish our light, instead, they would guide us towards growth. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the town of Brookshire stood together, brilliant and renewed, prepared to embrace whatever lay ahead while carrying every piece of who we were beneath our shared story. The box of memories became a symbol, reminding us that while we may lock down at twilight, it was the unlocking in the light of day that truly defined our existence. There's a certain hush that blankets the world when the clock strikes midnight, a stillness that feels both serene and unsettling, and it's during one of these quiet moments that I found myself grappling with the choices that led me to the life I now lead. My name is Mark, and I earned over $10,000 a month designing immersive virtual environments for high-stakes clients, yet beneath this carefully crafted facade of success lay a tangled web of anxiety and regret. It wasn't always like this, of course. Years ago, I was just another dreamer plodding through an uninspiring 9-to-5, my hopes neatly tucked into the corners of my modest cubicle, dreaming of escape. It was during one of those soul-sucking days that I first stumbled upon an online forum where people shared the secrets of their financial success. Ask Reddit for those earning over $10,000 per month, what do you do for a living to achieve that income? The title read, and in a moment of reckless curiosity, I clicked, devouring the tales of entrepreneurs who had transformed their passions into thriving careers. Inspired, I spent the next 2 years building an online presence, experimenting tirelessly with design until I finally landed my first big client, a tech startup working to revolutionize virtual reality for training simulations. My life shifted overnight. I moved out of my cramped apartment into a sleek downtown loft, relishing the attention and validation that came from my newfound lifestyle. But soon after the novelty wore off, whispers of doubt crept into my mind, late nights hunched over my screen, a carousel of client demands, and the pressure to maintain an image of success turned my triumph into a mundane cycle of anxiety. All I could think about was whether I was truly happy or merely living a facade of fulfillment, and the divide between my desires and my reality grew deeper. One evening, while preparing for another video call with a particularly demanding client, I overheard my neighbor, Sarah, talking in animated tones about her plans to quit her corporate job and start her own baking business. It was unpredictable, unstable, yet the fervor in her voice was palpable, filling the hallway with passion, something I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy and nostalgia. Her pursuit of happiness felt genuine, unlike the hollow satisfaction my success seemed to offer. As I lay in bed that night, the glow of my monitor casting a bluish hue across the room, I felt a wave of self-doubt wash over me, culminating in a gnawing question: was the money really worth it? Unable to shake that lingering thought, I resolved to confront my reality. The very next morning, I reached out to Sarah and, over coffee, shared my journey, confessing my admiration for her liberating choice. We talked for hours, bonding over our dreams and fears, and by the end of the conversation, an idea sparked in my mind: what if I started a side project, Perhaps a collaborative digital art installation that combined both our talents? I could provide the technical expertise while she infused the narrative with warmth and connection. It wouldn't be about the income but the joy of creativity and collaboration. The following weeks were transformative. As I chipped away at this new project, the excitement coursed through me like electricity. I felt invigorated as I would work late into the night, not because I had to, but because I chose to, and my perspective began to shift. My clients noticed my renewed passion as well. My work improved and the projects became less of a burden and more of a form of expression. The joy that emanated from the collaboration poured into other aspects of my life, rekindling friendships and bringing more laughter into my home. Although my monthly earnings fluctuated, I found a new balance that transcended money. The culmination of our joint project was both daunting and exhilarating, a site unveiling at a gallery downtown, a breathtaking journey through virtual landscapes inspired by personal stories of transformation. As our visitors wandered through the exhibit, hearing heartfelt narratives interwoven with the stunning visuals, I realized I had found a new purpose, one that didn't solely hinge on financial success. I've learned that fulfillment isn't defined by a dollar amount, but rather by the connections we forge and the passion we nurture. In retrospect, it's the vibrant tapestry of life experiences that we weave together, and sometimes, stepping off the beaten path is the best decision we could ever make. Update: since the exhibit, I've decided to take on fewer clients, focusing on projects that truly resonate with me while nurturing this new creative venture with Sarah. Together, we're exploring deeper collaboration while offering workshops for aspiring artists and business owners. My income is more modest now, but I feel richer in ways that surpass money. My life has become a canvas painted with vibrant colors I never knew I could create. Every day since I made that shift, I revel in waking up with the sun slanting gently through the window, illuminating the room in soft golden hues. My mornings have transformed from hastily throwing on clothes and mentally running through deadlines to slow, balanced rituals that awaken my senses. I brew a cup of rich, dark coffee, inhaling that earthy aroma that has become a comforting staple in my life. I often catch myself standing on the balcony, coffee in hand, taking in the serene beauty of the world around me, the rustle of leaves in a light breeze, the quiet chatter of birds, and sometimes even the distant laughter of children playing in a nearby park. This tranquility serves as the perfect backdrop for my thoughts, allowing my creative juices to flow in ways they haven't for far too long. I think back to the days when money felt like the only measure of success and wonder how I let myself forget the true joy of creation. Sarah's energy is truly infectious. We spend hours brainstorming, sketching ideas in our notebooks, and cracking open a bottle of wine late in the evenings to give life to our shared dreams. With each passing day, collaborating with her feels less like work and more like a coming together of two souls who genuinely understand one another, each having transcended the limits our previous careers imposed on us. The workshops we've started have been nothing short of magical. Watching aspiring artists and business owners learn from our experiences and find their own voices is fulfilling in ways I had never anticipated. Each session is filled with laughter, creativity, and a shared commitment to drive our passions forward, and I'm beginning to see the glimmers of their potential reflected back at me. The energy in the room is palpable, tinged with a sense of mutual growth and encouragement, a space devoid of judgment where creativity flourishes. I vividly remember a participant shared how she had been too afraid to pursue her artistic inclinations for years, feeling trapped by society's expectations. When she finally unveiled her painting, tears streamed down her face, not just from relief, but from the dawning realization that she had the right to express herself fully. That moment struck a chord deep within me, reinforcing my decision to step away from the frenetic rush of my previous life. I can hardly believe how far I've come, both personally and professionally. Sure, the financial stability I used to enjoy has been replaced by a more modest existence, but the richness I experience now is found in the moments made of laughter, creativity, and vulnerability. I've learned to redefine what it means to feel fulfilled. It's more layered and genuine than I ever imagined. Evenings have taken on a new rhythm. Often, I'll find myself cozied up on the couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, feeling grateful as I share stories or brainstorm ideas with Sarah. Sometimes we stay silent, simply enjoying each other's presence, letting our thoughts intermingle as the day slowly fades into night, sprinkled with stars that shine like dreams waiting to be realized. It's a raw, honest reflection of where I am now, and looking back seems almost alien compared to the internal freedom I feel. In the quiet, my mind often wanders to those early days of my transition, where I felt a cacophony of uncertainties swirling in my head. There's that small part of me that occasionally whispers doubts, wondering if I should be chasing after clients again or regretting my slower, more intentional pace. But then I remind myself, this is where the real treasure lies. I reconnect with that vibrant sense of purpose. The voice that once drowned under the chaos has returned, more robust than before. It tells me to trust the process, that fulfillment won't be measured by one's bank account but by the lives I touch, including my own, that stepping off the beaten path is not merely a reluctant retreat, but rather a brave journey into the wilderness of possibility. A little part of me even wonders if I could ever go back. I feel like a bird that's finally taken flight, feeling the exhilarating rush of wind beneath my wings, and now, the thought of confinement is laughable. And while I acknowledge the practicalities of life, utility bills and groceries, there's an undercurrent of excitement that pulses through me at the thought of exploring all these new possibilities with Sarah. Together, we're embarking on more than just a venture, we're cultivating a community of dreamers and creatives, revitalizing the world around us as we push toward a shared vision. The fact that I am earning less doesn't feel like a loss, rather, it is an investment in a richer life, one that sings with authenticity and connection. As I lay in bed each night, I find comfort in knowing I have overcome the doubts that once clawed at my heart. Weaving the threads of passion and purpose into the fabric of our daily lives feels like the ultimate act of rebellion against the voices that once dictated what success should look like. The canvas of my life is expanding, and I look forward to the beautiful strokes that are yet to come, eager for tomorrow's sunrise and the promise of new beginnings it holds. As the days stretched into weeks, each morning felt like an invitation to paint my life anew. Mornings were no longer merely a ritual of waking and rushing, but rather cherished moments where I could savor a steaming cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into my palms while sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the wooden floors in soft golden hues. With Sarah by my side, our partnership blossomed both in art and in life. We crafted workshops that not only encouraged budding artists but also drew in small business owners eager to translate their passions into viable enterprises. There was something profoundly satisfying in sharing our knowledge, watching individuals rediscover their dreams, their eyes alight with the spark of possibility. One day, as we wrapped up another successful workshop, I noticed Clara, a quiet woman in her 40s, lingering behind. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her finished piece on the table, a vibrant painting that depicted a sunlit garden, reminiscent of her childhood home. The colors were bold and raw, each stroke bursting with unfiltered emotion. Approaching her, I could see the tears pooling in her eyes, reflecting a swirling mix of pride and vulnerability. "I haven't let myself paint in years," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I forgot what it felt like to create something that was just me." As she spoke, I realized how deeply our workshops touched lives beyond mere art. We were touching on the core of what it meant to be human. Feeling an overwhelming surge of empathy, I reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "You've unveiled something beautiful today," I replied, knowing that her creativity was not just a form of expression but a breakthrough, a return to a part of herself she'd hidden away. Interactions like these filled my heart with warmth, creating a bridge between those in the workshop and the artists we were becoming ourselves, breaking down the invisible walls of isolation we often feel in our journeys. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The transition from a high-earning career to one of modest income had its challenges, especially concerning my savings. I began watching my financial habits, trimming down on daily luxuries. Dinners out with friends turned into cozy potlucks, spontaneous weekend getaways became quiet hiking adventures, and my wardrobe shifted to a blend of artistic thrift finds. At first, I fought against the changes, courage challenging my fears, but I soon discovered that life offered deeper, more fulfilling experiences outside the bustling consumer world I'd once inhabited. One rainy evening, as I sat curled up in our studio, surrounded by brushes and canvases, I received a text from my old business partner, Greg. He wanted to meet up to discuss a collaboration on a project I'd once been a part of, one that had been lucrative but lacked passion. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps just the need to understand how my old life could intersect with my new, but I agreed. Our meeting was at a trendy cafe in town, the kind that thrummed with energy and sold overpriced coffee. As Greg walked in, a formally polished shadow of the creative I once knew, I felt conflicting emotions rush through me, nostalgia mixed with a hint of disappointment. "I've been meaning to tell you," he started, his gaze scanning the vibrant artworks hanging on the walls. "Your exhibit was different, real." The compliment felt heavy, almost burdensome, a reminder of the crossroads I had danced between. "It was all about authenticity," I replied softly, feeling a flicker of pride. We fell into routine conversation, yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension, the acknowledgement that we were no longer on the same pathway despite sharing a rich history. As Greg detailed his latest projects, I felt the distance between our definitions of success widen. The conversation turned to income as he casually mentioned, "You should consider coming back, Angela, you were always brilliant at landing high-paying clients." The suggestion hung heavy in the air, the implication swirling around us like a dark cloud. "I'm not sure I want that life anymore," I found myself saying, my heart racing at the sudden defiance. What good is high income without fulfillment? His expression tightened, and I watched as he struggled to understand, trapped in his corporate mentality. That evening, as I returned home, the warmth of my studio felt especially comforting. I knew this was where I belonged, where my spirit danced freely, unswayed by the binary metrics of success. In the following weeks, my resolve only strengthened. Clara returned to our workshops, her growth a small but significant testament to our collective purpose. The pieces we were crafting transcended the canvas, forming a community where passion wasn't measured in dollar signs but in authentic connections. As I lay down each night, the worries about finances certainly still lingered, but they grew quieter, overshadowed by the vibrant tapestry of newfound purpose in my life. I realized wealth truly resided not in bank accounts but in the moments we shared, laughter over a shared meal, the joyous shouts of a budding artist celebrating their first piece, or even the quiet contentment of painting side by side with a friend. And eventually, one evening as dusk settled, painting with Sarah in the fading light, I listened to her quiet humming, a simple melody so soothing, it seemed to weave itself around us like a shawl. She turned to me and smiled, and something in that moment clicked. The threads of our separate lives were intertwining, building a hopeful future filled with colors yet to come. Each night, as I drifted into sleep, I surrendered to the beauty of the unknown that awaited with the dawn, grateful for the shadows that led me here, confident that whatever lay ahead, I would continue to create my story one brushstroke at a time. The first time I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me at the office was a Tuesday morning, just after I'd refilled my coffee for the third time. I'd been with the federal government for nearly a decade, and while I loved the sense of purpose that came with serving the public, the lingering tension in the air lately felt palpable, almost like a living entity hovering above every email and conversation. It wasn't just me. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones about changing policies and shifting priorities, each day seeming laced with uncertainty. I was a junior analyst in the Department of Health and Human Services, and my job had always been about drowning in data but finding comfort in the mission, to ensure the well-being of our community. But in the past few months, that mission felt compromised, diluting into the political fray that churned silently around us. It was a typical day, the kind that felt achingly monotonous, dotted by the buzz of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. Yet, amidst the predictability, a low hum of anxiety snaked through the office, and I found myself endlessly tapping at my keyboard, attempting to focus on my reports. My desk was cluttered with printed research, sticky notes scribbled with reminders, but my mind drifted toward a conversation I'd overheard between two senior colleagues. They were debating the whisper of budget cuts, and whether recent changes in administration would affect funding for the health programs that had been my focus. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, flickering vulnerability like a neon sign in darkened streets. The success of the initiatives I was so passionate about was on shaky ground, and I couldn't shake the thoughts of the families who relied on these programs, all while grappling with my own ambition. I wanted to rise in my career, to advocate for those who couldn't speak for themselves, yet fear crawled beneath my skin, a reminder that I needed to tread carefully. After a long day, when the sunset stained the skyscrapers outside my window with warm hues, I felt a sudden, desperate urge to connect with my peers. Taking a breath, I shot a message into our office group chat, just curious, what's the mood like these days? The response was immediate, a flood of uncertainty and fear cascaded in. It's rough, one colleague admitted, echoing my hidden turmoil, I just don't know how long we can keep this up. Another added, the higher-ups seem lost. I felt a sense of camaraderie bonding us, yet the tension climbed, thick and suffocating. I had always valued open discussions, believing they produced solutions, but this felt different, a confrontation with shadows rather than a rally toward collective strength. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, discussions began to swirl about potential layoffs and department restructures. I barely noticed the changing colors of autumn outside our windows as my focus narrowed on the fear-driven thoughts bottlenecking my creativity. One evening, as I sat alone in my car before heading home, I received an email from an upper management figure, something about a meeting the following week. The subject line was enough to send adrenaline pumping through my veins, reassessing organizational structure. My heart raced as I scanned the office lobby, eyes meeting colleagues, all wearing similar masks of uncertainty. Anxiety tightened its grip, and I decided to reach out to one of my closest colleagues, Leah, who shared my worries. We met after work at a small coffee shop down the street, both of us searching for solace in the warmth of chamomile tea. I formulated a brief strategy in my mind, a small glimmer of hope for restoring our shared sense of purpose. But as I shared my concerns, Leah sighed, the flickering light of a candle casting long shadows on her face. "It's not just about us losing our jobs, it's about the lives that depend on our work," she said, her voice cracking slightly. That statement echoed in my mind, guiding my thoughts toward a deeper commitment. In the following days, I finally made a choice. I could either remain a passive observer or take an active role in our shifting landscape. I organized a small lunch discussion with the office, a chance for us to speak honestly about our fears, hopes, and the future of our services. When the day came, I stood nervously at the front of the conference room, surrounded by familiar faces, and allowed vulnerability to flow through me as I shared my own anxieties about our mission being lost amidst political games. To my surprise, they opened up in return, sharing stories that intertwined their lives with those of the people we served. What began as a timid discussion transformed into a heartfelt exchange that lifted the invisible weight off our shoulders. As stories unfolded, it became not merely a session of venting, but a renewal of our collective commitment to those we served. I noticed smiles breaking through the grim facade, expressions of shared purpose guiding me through to a dimension of hope. Weeks passed, and while the winds of change continued to blow harshly outside, we found security in our bond. The meeting I had dreaded arrived unexpectedly. However, it turned out that our shared spirit had sparked an initiative that returned focus to our core objectives and revitalized commitments. The leadership recognized the depths of our work, and slowly, the tide began to shift. The ultimate resolution felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for far too long. In the end, while uncertainty still loomed on the horizon, we had formed an unbreakable support network which kindled a flame of resilience that would carry us forward. Looking back, there was grace to be found in those moments of vulnerability that led to such reaffirming transformation. And just like that, amidst the cacophony of office life, we discovered that connection and openness can weather even the most tempestuous storms. After all, in the humdrum routine of the federal government, it was the shared understanding of our mission that ultimately tethered us together. A month later, as I draft this, I can't help but reflect on how fear morphed into fortitude. Those who once felt mute in the silence learned to vocalize their passion, thus finding strength in community, and in time, I understood that my greatest narrative wasn't just about the bureaucratic machinery, but about people, and the stories that bind us all together. When I look back on that month in the cavernous halls of the federal building, it's strange how the discomfort of uncertainty transformed into something approaching grace. I remember the first time I overheard two colleagues in the break room, their voices a beautiful blend of laughter and understanding. There was Kelly, a mid-level analyst with an incredible knack for predicting policy trends, and James, whose deadpan humor often masked an extraordinary dedication to his work. They were engaged in a spirited debate about the merits of a new regulation, but instead of leading them to the usual corporate competition, it sparked an affiliation that felt far more enriching. It was in those casual moments where we leaned into vulnerability and authenticity that shifted our energy. I can't help but smile at how we began to celebrate small victories by bringing in homemade treats on Fridays, transforming mundane workdays into little havens of connection. We would gather around the kitchen table, laden with cookies, fruit platters, and an occasional leftover casserole. Sharing food felt like the oldest and simplest gesture of closeness. Secretly, we all hoped these interactions would bolster us against the heaviness of our duties, which often seemed to stack higher as the stream of regulations poured in from the top. Amidst the ever-present talk of budgets and deadlines, deeper conversations about life outside the office sprung forth. I learned that James was going through a rough patch with his wife, and amid the company banter that surfaced from the shared snacks, he allowed himself to share his worries. Kelly, in her gentle yet tenacious manner, proffered advice, sharing how community gardens had nurtured her connection with neighbors and, in turn, helped her grow a sense of belonging. Listening to these stories became my solace. In this network of souls thrown together by duty, I found my voice and a purpose that exceeded the sum of our tasks. We were threading our stories into a larger mosaic that was both personal and communal, an unexpected demonstration of resilience that extended beyond project deadlines. Yet, amidst this blooming camaraderie, unrest lurked in the shadows of our building, infiltrating my peace. Rumors had begun swirling about budget cuts that would target our department. The stress accumulated like spring rain, a quiet weight upon the shoulders of my coworkers, and I could see it in the faces of even my most spirited colleagues. Kelly lost her typical enthusiasm, her smiles roaming further into the realm of forced gestures. I could sense the hive mind forming again, the collective fear that, like a rising tide, would wash over the connections we had spent weeks nurturing. During one of those moments, after the customary Friday snack session, I gathered the courage to speak up. What if we, as a team, host an informal meeting to air our thoughts? To strategize how we can articulate our worth to the higher-ups? Silence wrapped around us for a heartbeat before the murmur of agreement started to build. James nodded, wiping crumbs from his fingers as he offered to draft an agenda, while Kelly suggested we invite others from different departments, illustratively bolstering our diverse strengths. The week that followed became transformative. Those sessions were more than a meeting of minds, they were a heartbeat. Each voice harmonized with urgency and relief, intertwining resumes and success stories, defiantly tethering us to our mission and our value. As we drew closer to our presentation to senior management, I watched as Kelly and James regained their spark, radiating conviction that pulsed through our group. The day we presented came like a soft sunrise, nervously bright yet filled with potential. Stepping into that conference room, I felt a tide of collective strength wash over me, calming the nerves that had clawed at my stomach. The discussions flowed freely. It was more than just facts and figures. We painted a picture of our responsibilities, their impact, and how each of us was a thread in the intricate fabric of our organization. By the end, we left the room with heartbeats echoing off the walls, and although it was too soon to gauge the repercussion of our efforts, the liberation of our voices echoed in the corridors far beyond that day. Looking back, I knew the journey hadn't just been one of advocacy for our work but a profound understanding of connection and the ways in which we could support each other in the face of uncertainty. A few weeks later, we received the news that funding would be reallocated, and while we weren't entirely out of the woods, our department would remain intact for the time being. There was cheer and relief among us, and I was overcome with a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. As we celebrated, surrounded by laughter and the remnants of a potluck, I realized my narrative had grown beyond my initial fears of bureaucratic red tape. My greatest takeaway wasn't the survival of our department, it was the unexpected gift of community. And so, as I sit here reflecting, the threads weaving through our lives, a blend of doubt, resilience, compassion, and hope, remind me that, ultimately, it wasn't just about doing one's job well, but rather discovering the power of our collective stories that fortified our mission. Update: several months later, the camaraderie remains. The workings of the federal government can still feel daunting at times, but we've found a rhythm. Recently, Kelly organized a book club focusing on various genres, and while our discussions often wade through the waters of policy, they now reflect the broader human experience we are all navigating together. I think of how far we've come and know that in our own quiet little corner of the bureaucracy, we're crafting not just policies but lasting friendships that will endure long after budgets are reviewed. And in that, I find comfort, always looking forward to the stories yet to be told. In this newfound camaraderie, each gathering became a gentle reminder that the monotony of government life could blossom into something more profound and rich. Our book club meetings transformed from mandatory coffee breaks into indulgent explorations of literature and philosophy, with everyone silently celebrating their chance to share and engage in a sanctuary that was far removed from metrics, deadlines, and surveillance. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the tall office windows, painting the concrete space in hues of gold, we delved into a collection of short stories that explored the essence of humanity, tales of triumph, tragedy, and everything in between. It was here, amidst the laughter and solemn pauses, that I shared my own story, one that I had kept tucked away in my heart for years. I spoke of my arrival in Washington, D.C., a young idealist fresh out of college, bloom-stunted by the stark realization that reality was less about the uplifting calls for change I had imagined and more about routing paperwork and navigating through labyrinthine regulations. The room fell silent as I described the day I sat in my office, staring at a stack of files that felt like a mountain, discouraging me from moving forward. I shared the moment when I had considered walking away, feeling invisible in a sea of formality, only to encounter an older colleague, Mr. Henderson, who would change my perspective forever. Those words ignited something within our group, a realization that we were all merely figures in a vast sea, collectively struggling to keep our heads above water. And then, as if stirred by an unseen current, others began to share their own fears and aspirations, the young intern working late-night shifts while juggling classes, the single mother striving for stability, the longtime employee fighting to keep optimism alive in a world that felt all too often heavy with cynicism. Each voice was distinct yet harmonized into a beautiful cacophony of vulnerability, weaving threads of connection between us. It struck me then how our small gathering, initially viewed as just another obligation, had become a tapestry of shared experiences, stitched together by empathy and understanding. Weeks turned into months, and each meeting deepened our bond, eclipsing the original intent of simply escaping the office grind. We began to celebrate birthdays, organize potlucks, and even staged mini poetry slams, where we poured our hearts into verses that dared to question the very fabric of our lives. In those moments, the warp and weft of our daily government duties became laden with the richness of humanity. It was refreshing to hear laughter and see the glint in our eyes when we allowed ourselves to be just people, stripped of titles and responsibilities. However, the peace was disrupted one Wednesday. Just as we settled into our routine, an email pinged across our screens announcing budget cuts, deep, suffocating cuts that would ripple through our departments, threatening jobs and projects. The collective sigh that followed was palpable, settling like fog in the air. I felt my heart sink as I glanced around the room, meeting the worried eyes of my colleagues. What had blossomed felt suddenly fragile, as though one gust of wind could scatter our fledgling community. After a tense discussion, rather than growing weary, we resolved to hold each other up. This time, we would not linger in silence. In the days that followed, we became a fortress. Inspired by our honest discussions, we rallied together, strategizing how to advocate for our team and the services we provided. Fueled by our connections, we wrote letters, organized meetings, and shared stories of the real impact our work had on ordinary lives. The pages of policy we lived in were not merely lines and clauses, they had substance, shaped by the moments of joy, support, and connection we cultivated daily. Our efforts did not go unnoticed. Slowly, perspective shifted as senior management began to recognize the value of our united voices. Though the process was harrowing, our resilience became evident. We engaged with those across departments, sharing insights, proving that the threads of connection woven through our book club extended far beyond our intimate gatherings. They formed a lifeline to the larger community. Gradually, the budgets were revised, and while some cuts remained inevitable, our department emerged transformed by solidarity. Looking back now, I realize that these challenging moments were not merely obstacles, they were vital threads that added depth to our narrative, a reminder of the power inherent in shared experiences and common goals. As I sit here, reflecting on the past few months, I understand that what began as an avenue for escaping the monotony of bureaucracy evolved into a powerful testament to our humanity. I've learned that when we stand together, even the most daunting bureaucratic machinery can be rendered manageable through connection, laughter, and shared stories. In conclusion, I feel a bittersweet tug at my heart as I contemplate what lies ahead. Our tales continue to unfold, each day filled with new chapters that I can't help but look forward to embracing. Who knows what stories we will create next? For now, I find solace in knowing I am not alone in this journey. In the warmth of our shared experiences, the spirit of our community thrives, untouched by the challenges that loom outside the walls of our office, reminding us that we are, ultimately, the authors of our own narrative. It was one of those mundane evenings that seemed endless, marked by the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my small, cluttered apartment. Like many of us do these days, I found myself scrolling through social media, half paying attention to the world around me. I had recently moved back to my hometown after college, trying to settle into a routine that felt both familiar and painfully dull. I wasn't particularly in touch with my old friends anymore, but every now and then, I would receive a random friend request or notification from them, invoking fond memories and a tinge of nostalgia. That evening, however, the mundane spiraled into the unexpected as I stumbled onto something I wish I hadn't. While sifting through my usual lineup of memes and pet videos, I came across a post from Jordan, my old high school friend. He had shared a link that, out of sheer curiosity, I clicked on. That's when I was greeted with a highly explicit video, featuring none other than him. My heart jumped, I could hardly process what I was seeing. The shock wasn't just in the content itself, it was the raw surrealism of seeing someone I grew up with in such an intimate and revealing situation, a stark contrast to the goofy teenager I remembered. I felt that disorienting blend of disbelief and uncomfortable intrigue, my brain racing through the implications. How did this happen? Did he know it was out there? I spent the next few days wrapped in a haze of confusion and guilt. I often wondered whether I should reach out to Jordan, but the fear of crossing a line haunted me. What would I even say? Hey, I found your video online? The words felt ridiculous and invasive. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just a fluke of the internet, and that I should let it go, but every time I scrolled past his social media profiles, I felt a pang of disturbance, as if our past friendship was tainted by this unintended discovery. The thought spiraled in my mind: was he okay? Was anyone else aware of this? Was it being shared? I waded through the murky waters of my emotions. I didn't want to objectify him or reduce him to a single, damaging narrative, but I couldn't shake my anxiety about whether he was aware of what was happening behind the scenes of his online persona. After wrestling with myself for a week, I finally found the courage to send him a message, accompanied by a deep breath and the sincerity of a friend. I typed and retyped my words, carefully choosing my tone, desperate to tread lightly. "Hey, I know this might sound weird, but I came across something online and I wanted to check in with you." When he responded, it took me completely by surprise. At first, there was a simple, bemused acknowledgement of my message, but then his tone shifted. "Yeah, I guess it's out there. I thought I could trust that guy with my private videos, but turns out that wasn't the smartest decision." Reading his words, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. There was no anger or embarrassment in his reply, just a resigned acceptance of the mishap, an acknowledgement of his choices, the nature of trust and intimacy in this digital age. It felt like a weight lifted, an opening for genuine conversation, as we ended up chatting late into the night, reminiscing about school days while skirting around the awkwardness that had initially bridged us together. With every message exchanged, I realized how important it was to extend our understanding to one another, to let each other live beyond the confines of our past selves, and come to terms with our humanity, flaws and all. As days turned into weeks, Jordan and I gradually rebuilt our friendship. He shared more about his experience, how the moment had taught him to be more careful with his choices online. I admired his resilience, how he embraced this new reality instead of hiding from it. It became clear that the incident, while unfortunate, had led to a deeper understanding of trust and vulnerability in relationships, guiding both of us into a more profound and honest connection with each other. Eventually, that unexpected thread that had linked the two of us, so fraught but necessary, loomed large, creating a bridge that carried us forward. In the end, I learned that sometimes shocking experiences can shake us into clarity, reminding us that life, with its highs and lows, is ultimately built on the connections we forge. As I closed my laptop that night, I carried with me a newfound appreciation for the intricacies of friendship, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and trust. Update: a few months later, Jordan launched a podcast where he shared his journey through self-acceptance and the complexities of personal identity in the digital age. I was honored to be one of his first guests, and that raw conversation turned into something both healing and empowering for us both. As I sat across from Jordan in that small, cozy recording studio, the walls adorned with vibrant artwork and a soft rug beneath our feet, the atmosphere was infused with a sense of purpose that transcended our initial fears. It was as if we were stepping onto a stage, but instead of an audience of strangers, we were merely two friends, each sharing pieces of ourselves we had once kept hidden. I watched as he adjusted the microphone, his brow furrowing in concentration while he recalled the uphill battle of self-acceptance. In that moment, I remembered the raw feeling that had surged within me when I stumbled upon his NSFW photos months earlier, how they had unraveled my world and spun it into a tangled web of confusion, admiration, and guilt. It had felt so surreal, and I scarcely imagined that we would come to share such a profound journey afterward. We dove deep into discussions about identity, not only his but also mine, finding solace in the confession of our experiences in a world that often felt too demanding. With each passing moment, the podcast transformed from a simple sharing of stories into a patchwork of vulnerability, where we challenged the notions of expectation and fear surrounding our identities. I spoke of my initial reaction to his photos, of feeling conflicted between admiration for his confidence and a strange betrayal of our friendship, and how I grappled with the realization that vulnerability could be a bridge rather than a divide. Jordan listened intently, his eyes lighting up as I described the turmoil of wanting to reach out and support him while also grappling with my own insecurities about my perceptions. The air was thick with honesty and connection, two elements that had previously felt so far removed. By the time we wrapped up the session, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow through the studio window that felt like a blessing on our shared vulnerability. We spent a moment in comfortable silence, reflecting on how this had become more than just a podcast episode. It was a turning point for both of us. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. I realized that those experiences we endured, the unexpected discoveries and the moments of raw honesty, had transformed us into individuals who understood the nuanced dance of connection in an often fragmented world. There was an unspoken promise that despite the myriad of uncertainties life tosses our way, we would navigate the full spectrum of emotions together. The podcast episode aired 2 weeks later, and it was shared amongst our friends and family, leading to conversations we could have only dreamed of having before. Reactions varied, some were supportive, others cautious, but the thread of understanding was woven throughout, sparking a gentle dialogue about identity and acceptance. In the coming months, our friendship deepened, evolving into a safe space where we bared our hopes and fears without reservation. It became clear that our experiences were merely the starting points. Together, we explored deeper conversations about what it meant to express love and vulnerability in friendships, touching on the fears that kept people isolated and ashamed of their authentic selves. Jordan received messages from intrigued listeners who found strength in his story and our conversation, and I would sometimes smile at how far we had come from that initial moment of discomfort and confusion. Not long after, I decided to create a blog inspired by our discussions, focusing on mental well-being and the beauty of genuine connections. It was cathartic, and eventually, it blossomed into a platform for others to share their truths. As I wrapped up a thoughtful post late one night, reflecting on the delicate balance of trust and vulnerability, I glanced over at my notification feed to discover a message from one of my readers. It was a heartfelt letter from someone who identified with the struggles of acceptance and the fear of being judged, who thanked me for sharing my story. In that moment, I felt a comforting realization settle in. Our lives are often a mosaic crafted from our connections, our fears, our stories, and the way we choose to understand them. And as these exchanges trickled down the corridors of time, I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing we were building something beyond ourselves, creating waves of understanding and acceptance for anyone who dared to share their journey. In the weeks that followed that moment, I found myself enveloped in an unforeseen sense of purpose. Writing was a refuge, a way to untangle the complexities of my thoughts while forging connections in a broader world. The glowing screen of my laptop became a portal not just for sharing my own experiences, but for inviting others into a dialogue. I began to receive letters not only from those grappling with their own identity but from a diverse tapestry of voices, friends, family, and even strangers, all reaching out in vulnerability. Each note was a thread weaving together a larger narrative of shared humanity, and with every message, I felt the weight of my previous fears begin to lift, like a fog that dissipates under warm sunlight. As Jordan's podcast gained traction, our conversations drew in an audience hungry for authenticity. He had a talent for cultivating a space where stories flowed freely, and I watched as people opened up about their own experiences, revealing the wounds they carried, the battles they fought in silence. Every episode was a reminder that we were not alone, that the threads of our lives were interconnected, even if we often felt like solitary travelers on our respective journeys. The therapeutic richness of our discussions resonated so powerfully that we considered live sessions, inviting our listeners to join in and share their stories, live and unfiltered. One evening, after a particularly moving episode, I laid on my couch, gazing at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in my mind. I remembered my own journey, the immense weight of fear I had endured when I unearthed Jordan's NSFW content. It had initially felt like a betrayal, a rupture in the fabric of our friendship. Yet, now, it appeared as merely a chapter in a broader narrative of growth, acceptance, and deeper understanding. As I turned those ideas over, I started to pen my thoughts, a reflection on how fear can isolate us but also push us toward clarity and connection. Weeks later, after I shared my reflections in one of our episodes, a woman named Mia reached out. She was searching for solace in a tumultuous sea of self-doubt after experiencing something deeply personal, a shocking revelation from her best friend who had suffered through similar battles of identity. Mia's note was laced with pain, courage, and a hint of hope, and as I read her words, my heart swelled with empathy. I felt a calling, a collective responsibility to channel our experiences into something constructive for others, to transform our authentic exchanges into healing touchstones. Eventually, we scheduled a collaborative session where Mia could join us on air, a chance to share her story with vulnerability. The three of us chatted before recording, and I could sense Mia's hesitation. What if no one understands? She shared, the tremor in her voice betraying her fears. In a reassuring tone, I replied, "That's the beauty of sharing. Even if just one person listens and feels seen, it's worth it." With the warmth of our shared energies wrapping around us, we pressed record, and Mia shared more than I could have hoped. Her authentic vulnerability inspired a flood of comments from listeners, people sharing their own experiences of love, loss, and the rawness of existence. After that episode, our community grew exponentially. Messages poured in, and together, we navigated through backstories of fear, courage, and redemption. Each tale felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, slowly creating a whole that was more vibrant than I could have imagined. Through these interactions, I learned that vulnerability weaves the strongest bonds, tying hearts together in a way superficial connections never could. Months later, during a live session that felt charged with energy and authenticity, I reflected on how far we'd come. I could hear the hushed whispers of other shared stories around me, an orchestra of human experiences blending into a comforting harmony. As we concluded, a listener's message popped up, someone thankful for the community we had fostered, expressing how the space made them feel seen for the first time in years. I shared that note aloud, feeling a lump forming in my throat. My heart brimmed with gratitude, a sense of belonging rising within me. This journey began with fear but transformed into something profound, an unabashed embracing of humanity's stories. As I closed my laptop that night, I understood that life is not merely a collection of moments but rather the bonds we forge amidst them, powerful connections that flourish in the soft glow of empathy. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were not just sharing stories anymore, we were nurturing a sanctuary where fears could be laid bare, acceptance could blossom, and every voice, even those hidden in the shadows, could resonate with truth. It was in this space that we truly found ourselves, each other, and the collective light we were meant to share. Confession: I, F18, have lived alone for 3 years in my own apartment. It might sound freedom-filled to many, especially those still grappling with curfews and the chaos of family life, but my solitude was woven from threads of loneliness, longing, and something else darker that I hadn't expected. When I signed the lease as a naive 16-year-old, I thought living alone would be a thrilling adventure brimming with newfound independence, but that initial excitement quickly morphed into an unforeseen isolation. My friends drifted away, busy with their own lives, and when I wrapped myself in the silence of my one bedroom, I started feeling like a ghost who haunted her own home. It began innocently enough, the occasional creak of the floorboards in the dead of night, tiny movements out of the corner of my eye that I brushed off as the remnants of a mundane day, when shadows appeared to grow longer. Yet my mind couldn't help but fill those gaps with questions. Was someone else in my apartment? Had I inadvertently invited a paranormal entity into my life through my self-imposed isolation? Just last week, as I curled on my couch with a blanket and a half-empty cup of cold tea, I caught a glimpse of somebody, small and fleeting, scutter behind my bookcase. I froze, my heart racing, and reason told me that it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the confines of my apartment held more than my simple belongings and scattered hopes. Curiosity grew into obsession as I spent my days searching through online forums and haunted house documentaries, tearing apart my sanity in the pursuit of understanding what lurked just beyond perception. Conversations with friends now consisted of nervous laughter and vague references to weird things in my apartment, as I tried not to show them how deeply unsettling the idea of my living situation had become. Then came the night I finally mustered enough courage to confront what I believed hid within my walls. Armed with a flashlight, I stood in the dim glow of my living room, my heartbeats echoing louder than any noise of the night. I ventured towards the bookcase, muttering to myself that ghosts were absurd, merely figments of an overactive imagination, and carefully, I tilted the furniture enough to peer behind it. My breath hitched as I saw not a ghost but a collection of items: a small, tattered teddy bear, a threadbare blanket, and crumpled pieces of paper covered in scribbles. They were dated, each note a fragment from someone's life squeezed into the space I had thought was solely mine. The notes told a story of sorrow, of someone who had lived there before me, trapped in an unbearable life, and after reading them, I felt a burgeoning empathy for the spirit that once inhabited my home. I realized that my isolation had echoed theirs, a continuous void that gnawed at the edges of happiness. As the days turned into weeks, I began writing letters to that person, sharing my fears, my dreams, and my confessions, about loneliness, about resilience, about wanting to reclaim the space where darkness had once settled. In those late-night scribbles, I started to feel a shift within myself. The burden I had carried began to lift as I bared my soul to the whispers that haunted my hallways. One letter brought an unexpected sense of closure. I realized I could take control of my own narrative instead of allowing the narratives of others, those who had left pieces of themselves behind, to dictate my life. I chose to embrace the solitude, to restore joy within the echo of silence rather than fear it. I decided that it was time to breathe new life into my apartment. Colors replaced the chipped walls, plants breathed verdancy into the once stark corners, and each adjustment felt like a step away from the ghosts of my past, toward a future filled with light. As for the lingering remnants of whoever had come before me, I left their notes nestled in a box with the teddy bear, placing it on a shelf I reserved for cherished memories, reminding myself that our pains often intertwine but do not define us. For the first time in years, my home truly felt like mine. I am no longer living alone, I am discovering myself, and perhaps that was the most profound resolution of all. I know that others may have struggled in similar spaces, so I want to share this tiny epiphany with them. Loneliness can spark fear, but it can also ignite a journey of self-compassion and understanding. Update: a couple of weeks after writing those letters, I woke up to the doorbell ringing persistently. I opened it to find a delivery driver with a package that bore my name. Inside was an unassuming frame, holding my favorite note from that box. Someone had found it and sent it with a sweet card that simply read, "You matter." It might have been a complete coincidence, but in that moment, I felt a sense of connection to the world that I never thought possible in my solitary apartment. I smiled, acknowledging the spectral whispers but no longer captive to them, allowing instead the gentle reminder of belonging to guide me, my once lonely refuge transformed into a sanctuary. This simple act of kindness sparked something deep within me, a flicker of warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the universe was gently nudging me to acknowledge that this solitary life I had carved out wasn't just an existence filled with shadows, but a story filled with possibilities, marked by the serendipity that brought that note back to me at just the right time. Instead of wallowing in my solitude, I found myself daydreaming, imagining connections, friendships, maybe even a sense of community. The thought of meeting someone new didn't seem so daunting anymore. After all, had I not just received a message from a stranger that resonated deeply with my heart? The next day, I ventured out, a little timidly, but with a sort of hopeful determination that was new for me. I stepped into the small cafe down the street from my apartment, the Nook. It was cozy, with the faint aroma of coffee and pastries wafting through the air, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I ordered a chai latte and found myself a corner seat, where I could observe the life bustling around me. I watched people laughing together, sharing stories or moments of quiet companionship, and it reinvigorated a sense of excitement within me. I was struck by the realization that each of them had a story, just like mine, full of struggles and small victories, sheltered within their laughter and chatter. I picked up my journal and began to write, letting the words flow freely from my head to the page. I poured everything into that small notebook, my silly fears, hopes, and musings about life, weaving the fabric of my lonely nights into something vibrant, a tapestry of my solitude transformed. As I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, a swift breeze danced around me, as if it too was whispering encouragement. Days turned into weeks, and I started making this a routine. My infrequent visits to the cafe blossomed into warm exchanges with the barista, Jennifer, who always remembered my order and threw in an extra pastry on slow days. Then there was Michael, an artist who frequented my corner table, sketching the patrons, and who eventually joined me one afternoon, sharing snippets of his artistic journey while I shared pieces of mine. Each interaction chipped away at the walls I had built around myself, and slowly, I began to see my apartment less like a fortress and more like a resting place, a canvas to dream on, instead of hiding within. I meticulously filled my space with mementos from an enriching life, photos of us laughing at quirky art shows, postcards from old friends, and even framed snippets of conversations that struck a chord. I still had the spectral whispers, but instead of haunting me, they enveloped me in a comforting embrace, an acknowledgement that I was not alone in my experiences anymore. I was a part of something greater, a beautiful life tangled with shared stories, laughter, and creativity. It was one evening, under the soft glow of warm string lights on my balcony, that an unexpected message lit up my phone. It was from the same anonymous number I had received the note from all those weeks ago. My heart raced as I read, "Hi. Where can I send another little something? It felt good to connect, and I would love to remind you again that you matter." My breath caught in my throat, that same warmth rushing back through me, not quite believing the world could be this kind. We exchanged a few messages that evening, the conversation so genuine and easy, as if we had known each other forever despite that initial anonymity. And just like that, a new friendship emerged, filled with laughter and support, reminding me that sometimes, amidst the fog of loneliness, it takes just one little connection to illuminate the path back to oneself. The specters of my past still visited, but now, they merely served to enhance the pieces of life I was reclaiming, quiet reminders of where I had been, which now felt like distant echoes against the symphony of laughter and companionship I was cultivating. I closed my eyes that evening, the cool breeze lightly rustling the leaves, and I smiled softly to myself, feeling a profound sense of belonging within my heart. And even though I had embraced solitude in the past, I was learning to dance a delicate waltz between presence and absence, discovering beauty in both the quiet times alone and the raucous laughter shared. A few weeks later, I received another note, this time not anonymous but signed, Kara, who turned out to be the mysterious sender who had ignited this journey of self-discovery. And though I still cherished my moments of solitude, I had finally learned that reaching out for connection wouldn't drown out my independent spirit but rather complement it. As the seasons shifted outside my window, so too did my perspective, as I rested comfortably in this place I now called home, my sanctuary, filled with the echoes of laughter, art, and an unshakable sense of belonging, a reminder that amidst the chaos of life, we always have the choice to nurture both solitude and companionship, creating a tapestry that is uniquely ours, interwoven with every meaningful connection we dare to make. With the arrival of that unexpected package, a seed had been planted deep within me, urging me to extend my hand beyond the boundaries of my cherished solitude. It was a kind of quiet revolution that felt secure, as if the walls of my apartment had started to lean in a little closer, helping me embrace the world outside. Days turned into weeks, and as the last vestiges of winter surrendered to the warmth of spring, I found myself living harmoniously with my new mindset. The park nearby, once a neglected thought, became an inviting breath of fresh air where I would occasionally. The question fluttered through my mind like a moth drawn to the dim light of my living room. It was simple, but the implications loomed heavy on my heart. Am I the asshole for charging my adult children rent? I never imagined this is where I would find myself at 55, standing at the crossroads of nurturing love and harsh reality. My children, Claire and Josh, had both moved back in after college, faced with a tight job market and student loans that loomed like clouds ready to burst. It felt like just yesterday I was sending them off into the world, filled with ambition and dreams, and now the stack of bills, once a distant whisper, was suddenly a roiling shout that demanded to be heard. I loved my children fiercely, but the reality of our situation was different now. My modest home, decorated with family photos that were practically engraved in my heart, was quickly becoming a shared refuge rather than a home. Things shifted, however, when the conversation turned to finances one evening while we surveyed my faded kitchen, once filled with laughter and now littered with remnants of takeout dinners. I broached the subject lightly, almost gingerly, trying to extricate myself from the churning feeling of guilt that wound tightly in my gut. You know, it's not that we can't help each other, I started, but maybe we should think about small contributions for living here. Claire, always the more outspoken of the two, rolled her eyes, casting a glance at Josh, who sat with his head buried in his phone, blissfully unaware. Seriously, Mom? Rent? We're trying to find our footing. She replied, exasperation cutting through her voice like a knife. I felt my heart sink as Josh chimed in, softening the blow with, we're still your kids, you know. Initially, I shrugged off their anger, convincing myself it stemmed from the stress of their own financial burdens, yet the guilt lingered like a shadow. The thought that I might be seen as cold or unloving gnawed at me. My thoughts spiraled, had I failed them by expecting them to contribute to the household? But then, another voice in my head reminded me of the sacrifices I had made. I had worked extra shifts to give them what they needed, and it dawned on me that this was about preparing them for the realities of adulthood, not about making me less of a mother. Still, I wrestled nightly with the decision, my journal filled with poignant reflections on whether love and responsibility could coexist without one overshadowing the other. It was during a heated argument a few days later that it all boiled over, my attempts at calm being met with more resentment. You say you're teaching us, but this feels more like punishment, Claire shouted, tears in her eyes. I held my breath, the weight of her distress settling heavily on my shoulders. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about trust and recognition. I'm not punishing you. I want you both to thrive. I want you to prepare for the world outside these walls, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. The room became engulfed in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. It was clear I needed to reconsider the way forward. After much soul-searching, I decided to propose a compromise that would allow us to keep our familial bond intact. The very next day, I gathered my children and talked through my thoughts, removing the label of rent and instead framing it as a living contribution, focusing on what they could help with, whether it was chores or a small monthly amount that would go toward shared costs. To my surprise, they listened, the tension in the room gradually ebbing as we discussed our expectations with open hearts. So it's not about just money, right? It's teamwork? Josh asked, his eyes lighting up with understanding. I nodded fervently, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. We moved forward with boundaries but also with a renewed sense of cooperation, and I marveled at the transformation that occurred, realizing we were not simply roommates navigating rent but rather a family redefining our dynamics together. As the weeks turned into months, I discovered that this change not only eased my financial burden but also rekindled a sense of shared purpose among us. Conversations returned to the table, laughter emanated from our shared moments, and in those evenings spent together, it felt as if we were finding our way back, stitching back together what was nearly frayed. The idea of charging them rent became not a source of resentment but a catalyst for deeper connection. In hindsight, I didn't just charge them, I opened the door to joint stewardship of our lives, an adjustment that allowed us to step forward together rather than apart. As for updates, it's been almost a year since the paradigm shift, and I'm heartened to say Claire now has an internship that could lead to a full-time job, while Josh is earning his keep through freelance gigs. They still contribute to household expenses, each month passing me their share with pride, as if each note exchanged is more than just money, but a message that reads, "We've got this, together." And as I sit in the same faded kitchen, watching them grow into the people I always hoped they would be, I realize this journey has taught me as much as it has taught them. Am I the asshole? Perhaps once, but I've come to understand that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the strongest connections. As I sit in that faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows on the table where we gather for our makeshift family meetings, I reflect on how our home has transformed over the past few months. When Josh and Emily moved in, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of expectation and uncertainty. I had been battling my own insecurities and regrets about charging them rent, fearing it would disrupt our bond. Yet, every time I see them, filled with determination. As they balance schoolwork with part-time jobs, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Each evening, as we share our meals, the laughter echoes in the corners of the room, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, dispelling any lingering doubt I had initially held about my decision. It had been Josh who first approached me with concern about finances after losing his last full-time job. He spoke earnestly about wanting to contribute more rather than feel like a burden. "I don't want you to struggle because of me," he had said, that familiar spark of responsibility igniting in his eyes. How could I argue with that? Emily followed suit, her spirit equally fired up, insisting that she too wanted to pitch in, to contribute to the household in a way that felt meaningful. It was then that I realized this was about more than just money, it was about empowerment. With the rent agreement in place, I made it abundantly clear that their contributions would be saved toward a future goal, perhaps toward their educational aspirations or an eventual escape of their own, helping to ensure they wouldn't find themselves completely reliant on me once they stepped into the wider world. Each time I handed them a receipt showing their contributions, I would joke, "Look at you, you're practically business owners now." Following those jokes were serious discussions about budgeting and saving. They would listen intently, their eyes bright, eager to absorb the advice, while I shared tales from my own youth, trying to weave in lessons learned as I stumbled through life. Those evenings began to intertwine with deeper conversations about dreams, fears, and the kind of people they envisioned themselves becoming. With every discussion, I could feel our relationship evolving, both as a parent and as individuals seeking to understand one another. One rainy afternoon, however, things took a challenging turn. Emily returned home distraught, her usual spark dulled. "Mom, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It feels like everything is piling on top of me," she admitted, falling onto the couch, her voice strained and defeated. I joined her on the couch, pulling the fuzzy blanket over us as we settled into the silence that accompanied her heavy words. The weight of missed assignments and looming deadlines pressed on her like an ocean wave, and I could see the hope in her eyes flicker momentarily. "What if we adjust a bit? Rent doesn't always have to be paid in full," I offered gently. "Your well-being comes first. It's okay to ask for help." My words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, silence enveloped us before she finally nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm clouds. As the weeks rolled by, we found new rhythms, discussing every tweak and adjustment we made to our agreements candidly. Josh, too, began to share his own struggles more openly, confessing moments of loneliness and his fear of never reaching the ambitions he carried. It was during one of these powerful exchanges that I understood the true essence of decisions made from love. Not only did they learn responsibility, but they also discovered vulnerability and space for genuine dialogue, something I had always longed for us to possess. We emerged stronger as a family, moved forward by empathy and mutual respect, acknowledging our individual journeys without losing sight of our shared path. In this warm cocoon of familiarity and love, I've realized that our home isn't just a physical space, it's a sanctuary carved from our shared experiences, successes, and collective heartaches. The question of whether I was the asshole lingers somewhere in the back of my mind, but it has transformed from a painful inquiry into an echo of a lesson learned. By fostering their independence within the walls of our home, I not only nurtured their growth but also kept the ties of our relationship tightly woven, reminding us all that love doesn't fade in the face of responsibility. Instead, it evolves, deepening in ways I could never have imagined. As I sit here, I can see that it isn't about the money or even the chores, it's about understanding, growth, and creating an environment where we can all be better versions of ourselves together. And while the future is uncertain, a chorus of questions still unanswered, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for this shared journey, knowing that being a parent is less about getting it right all the time and more about navigating every twist and turn with an open heart. Sometimes, I find solace in the thought of letting each of them fly with their own set of wings, ready to embrace whatever the world has in store, while I would remain here, cheering them on from the sidelines, proud of the choices we made together in this home of ours. However, as the weeks passed, I began to experience an unfamiliar unease, a gentle pressure building beneath the surface of our harmonious existence. It started with those quiet moments, sitting alone in my favorite worn-out chair while Josh and Lena collaborated at the kitchen table, their laughter and chatter creating a cozy atmosphere that made my heart swell with pride. Yet, tucked away in the corner of my mind was a prickling doubt, whispering that perhaps I had placed an unnecessary burden on their shoulders. The thoughts started to gnaw at me during sleepless nights, where thoughts raced through my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, questioning my decisions and choices. They did, after all, come to me during the pandemic when everything had been uncertain, their lives upended in ways I couldn't fully grasp. I remember my own parents, who had faced such trials with grit and resilience, but never once did they charge me rent. As days turned into weeks, the tight-knit bond we shared sometimes felt like it stood on shaky ground. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the joy of our routines, breakfast-making competitions, game nights peppered with sarcasm and laughter. And those afternoons when I would find them lost in their respective worlds, creativity bursting from them like blooming wildflowers. But the shadows of my thoughts lingered, lingering as a subtle reminder that their growing independence came with its own set of fears. One night, after an especially hectic day, I was cleaning up the remnants of dinner, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of clarity. I turned to them and, in a voice that quivered with a mix of uncertainty and resolve, asked if they felt the same way I did. To my surprise, their expressions turned serious, and I felt as if I had ventured into unknown territory. Josh, with his thoughtful gaze, spoke first. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We're here because you let us be ourselves, and if charging rent is part of that, then we accept it as a part of our growth." Lena, always the more intuitive one, added, "It's funny you mention this because I was worried it was our responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their words, laden with sincerity, left me both relieved and bewildered. Here I was, thinking I was the one responsible for their future, yet together, we had created something profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and support. The subsequent weeks held a newfound sense of openness, the pressure lifted, replaced by unexpected lightness. We spoke often, delving into deeper conversations about financial stability, career aspirations, and dreams yet to be realized. Each discussion became a building block, forming a bridge between my worries and their understanding of adulthood, and suddenly, Josh and Lena were no longer just my children, but partners in a shared journey of life. As we moved further into this phase of our lives, I began to find joy in the small victories, the little projects that each of them undertook that ventured into adulthood's daunting reality, with me as a spectator cheering them on in the background. One evening, each of them sat next to me, Josh back from a successful project pitch, Lena having submitted her first freelance article, the air thick with accomplishment. I placed my hand on theirs, a silent acknowledgement of our collective achievements, a bond that transcended the need for rent or adulting responsibilities. They were soaring, and I realized I was simply here to help them acclimate to the winds beneath their wings. And so our story evolved, settling into a rhythm that felt genuine and nurturing. It was about more than money or bills, it was about lessons learned under our roof, and I cherished the thought that perhaps I hadn't been the asshole after all. It was merely the ebb and flow of family dynamics shifting. With nights spent under the gentle glow of lamplight discussing prospects and dreams, I understood that being together, sharing our fears and aspirations, had emboldened us, allowing for a new understanding about what it means to navigate adulthood together. As we moved further into this unknown future, I embraced it, the unknown no longer felt like a weight but a canvas awaiting our colors. Perhaps being a parent is knowing when to let the reins go, and I felt ready for whatever paths lay ahead. The uncertainty didn't haunt me anymore, it ignited a sense of adventure. So, maybe in this journey, I was never an asshole, but rather just a guide, and we were collectively painting a beautiful masterpiece of our shared lives. It's strange how success can turn familiar faces into strangers, and I found that out the hard way. Just 3 years ago, I was scraping by, working endless hours for a salary that barely covered my bills, while dreaming up my own tech startup. I had wrestled with self-doubt. My wife Lily's family often reminded me of my shortcomings in the most subtle, backhanded ways. During family gatherings, I could always count on Grandma Marge to chuckle lightly and say, "Oh, sweetie, maybe when you grow up you'll find a real job." Or there was my brother-in-law Dave, who would mention my entrepreneurial dreams with an eye roll, citing the statistics of failed startups over a whiskey glass that glinted like a mocking star. They thought they were being jovial, but the undercurrent of disdain was unmistakable, and though I always laughed it off, deep down, it hurt. After countless late-night brainstorming sessions, those sleepless nights turned into something tangible. I launched my company and, against all odds, it began to flourish. I found my stride, hiring talented individuals, attracting investors, and suddenly, the landscape of my life had transformed overnight. As my bank account swelled and the aura of success enveloped me, I was astonished by the way my in-laws began to treat me. It felt as if their earlier skepticism had turned into sudden affection, their calls more frequent, their invitations more insistent. They would ask me for advice on their own ventures. Dave needed help with his small electronics shop, while Marge requested funding for her local charity. At first, I thought it was great. Surely this is what family does, right? We lift each other up. But after a while, the old feelings of resentment resurfaced. Their previous comments echoed in my mind each time I received a new request. I dug deep into myself and realized I was no longer the person they had always looked down on. One bittersweet afternoon, while I savored a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the busy street below, I made my decision. From that moment on, I stopped aiding them. No more money, no more advice, nothing. I felt a strange mix of liberation and guilt. How could I justify this? Was I really an asshole for wanting to distance myself from their past condescension? I recounted to Lily what I had done, my heart heavy with fear of her reaction. She was quiet for a long time, then she simply asked me how I felt about it. I admitted that I felt empowered, but I also worried that it made me unkind, perhaps unforgiving. "You deserve the respect you've earned," she finally said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. It was reassuring, but the nagging doubt remained. Soon enough, Thanksgiving rolled around, and the air was thick with tension. As expected, they were all too eager to reunite and discuss my success over turkey and stuffing, but I felt like a ghost at my own table. All the smiles felt forced, their inquiries laced with a touch of desperation and inadequacy. When Grandma Marge asked for a loan to help refurbish her house, I simply smiled and said I couldn't, that I was focusing my resources on my business. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see them reeling, struggling to reconcile the image of the once struggling me with the successful version I had now become. It dawned on me that perhaps they feared my rise. I had become the embodiment of everything they used to mock. Eventually, the evening wore on with awkward conversation and strained laughter. It seemed the air of pretension engulfed us, heavier than the dishes piled around the table. As we said our goodbyes, Grandma whispered, "You know, sweetie, it's good to see you doing well. Just remember, family is everything." I nodded, but inside, I felt a strange emptiness, a realization that maybe it wasn't that simple for me anymore. Days turned into weeks, and as I walked the fine line between emotional isolation and newfound freedom, I wavered between self-assurance and regret. I still thought of those family gatherings, how they had shifted so drastically, like falling leaves, beautiful yet tragic. A few months later, after a long day of work, I received a message from Dave, revealing the struggles he faced with his shop. In a moment of weakness, I contemplated extending my hand again but then recalled those biting words from the past. Choosing to stay true to my convictions brought a sense of solace and resoluteness. So, I crafted a balanced response, offering a single piece of advice. Stay determined. You have it in you to succeed. It was an echo, a reassurance of what I had once been. As I laid down that night, I realized I might not be the one in the wrong. Sometimes, severing ties isn't unloving, it's an act of self-preservation. And who knows? Maybe one day we could find a way back to each other. Maybe their perceptions would change, perhaps mine would too. With that thought, I drifted into a dream, a serene visage of hope amidst uncertainty. Update: several months later, I've been contacted again by my in-laws, this time more amiable, with heartfelt apologies and a recognition of their previous behavior. They've actually sought out some of my advice for their own businesses, and while I remain cautious, I'm willing to extend a hand again, just a little. Maybe the road to healing is slow and winding, but I'm finding peace in this journey. As the months rolled on, I often found myself reflecting on those turbulent times with my in-laws. Their negativity had loomed like a shadow over my accomplishments, dampening the pride I felt in my newfound success. Yet, as I watched my own business flourish, I began to ponder whether their critique had been more a projection of their insecurities than a true measure of my worth. I used to dread family gatherings, worrying that I'd have to endure their condescension, but now there hung this strange possibility in the air, an olive branch of sorts. When I received the message from my sister-in-law, I felt a mix of anticipation and caution. Her words were different this time, dripping with sincerity and regret, a stark contrast to the disbelief I had grown accustomed to. "Can we talk? We've been thinking a lot about everything," she typed, and each word pulled at a thread of hope I had nearly severed. That evening, I decided to meet her for coffee, carrying the weight of my reservations like a heavy cloak. As I walked into that familiar cafe, the scent of roasted beans enveloped me, grounding me as I scanned the room for her. When our eyes met, I noticed the tremor in her hands. It mirrored how I felt inside. Practically tiptoeing around the remnants of past grievances, we exchanged pleasantries before she dove in, expressing how their thoughts had shifted. "We've watched you grow from afar. It wasn't fair to judge you the way we did, and I realize now how deeply I misrepresented you," she confessed, sincerity shining in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of empathy surface for her struggles. Listening to her recount her own setbacks and the toll they had taken on her self-esteem, a part of me shifted as well, as I understood that we all wrestle with our defeats. I shared my experience, too, describing the pressure of climbing the ladder of success alone, a journey filled with both exhilaration and loneliness. As we spoke, the barrier between us began to dissolve, but the lingering distrust still lingered like an uninvited guest. Nonetheless, I sensed a desire for reconciliation growing, patchwork stitching together the ripped seams of family loyalty. Later, when I returned home, my wife greeted me with a knowing smile. She could tell I'd been wrestling with my emotions but also saw the subtle shift in my demeanor. I felt lighter, as though carrying this burden for so long had only bound me, and I wasn't convinced the past could ever truly be forgotten, but perhaps it could be transformed into something new. Over the next few weeks, I exchanged messages with my in-laws, cautiously engaging with their requests for advice, offering my insights into their ventures. They were eager to learn, humbled in ways only harsh reality can teach, and I found myself reveling in the irony that I, once the scorned, now played the role of mentor. As I watched them embrace their new roles, peacefulness enveloped me. Within the cracks of our past, budding companionship sought to emerge. But with every message and every encounter, I kept my heart grounded, vigilant against letting history repeat itself. Trust takes time to mend, and while the path forward is uncertain, I've realized that healing often requires both vulnerability and boundaries. I might have stepped into this journey tentatively, but each small interaction now feels like a step toward a brighter future. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? Perhaps. But sometimes, in the space where hurt and healing collide, understanding can create a bridge, one where I've started to rebuild, one cautious step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself in a peculiar state of reflection, teetering on a tightrope stretched between the past and the potential future. Each email from my in-laws pierced the silence of my routine, a mixture of trepidation and curiosity spiraling through me. I would sit at my desk, the golden afternoon light spilling through the window, casting patterns on the floor, and I would stare at their names on the screen as if they were foreign inscriptions from a long-gone civilization. It wasn't that I wanted to forget their past behavior, how they had scoffed at my ambitions and belittled my modest beginnings in favor of grounded expectations, but there was something persistently hopeful about their current tone. Their messages dripped with sincerity, laced with admissions of previous harshness, and I wondered if they, too, felt the weight of that pivotal moment when my little tech business surged into a thriving venture. It became evident that they weren't just reaching out with empty niceties, they were grappling with their own narratives, reconciling their feelings, and wondering if the family they had once deemed beneath them could now be considered a source of guidance. In one of those exchanged emails, they proposed a casual lunch, a neutral ground, a safe space for both sides to express and explore without the stifling attachment of unresolved tension. I found myself conflicted, tapping my fingers against the polished wood of my desk, picturing the cafe where we might meet, a quaint little spot with soft jazz playing in the background, birds chirping outside, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. What if I walked in, and the very sight of them ignited a whirlwind of my old hurt? Or what if, in the midst of pleasantries, I found a surprising twist of warmth amidst our shared history? Ultimately, I decided to agree to the lunch. Perhaps it was the willingness to embrace both the potential for pain and healing that propelled me forward. As the date approached, I crafted a mental script, a blend of caution and openness, how I might articulate my feelings but blend them with understanding. The moment I stepped into that cafe, my heart raced with each breath, a symphony of uncertainty built within me. I saw them there, my in-laws, sitting at a sun-drenched table, visibly different from the sharp-edged figures of my memory. Their smiles were soft, framed by an unfamiliar tenderness that made it hard to reconcile with the past. The conversation began stilted, filled with careful pleasantries and awkward laughter until eventually, warmth began to seep in, easing the tension like the gentle coverage of a summer blanket. As we talked about benign topics, I felt an invisible barrier start to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of shared humanity. Their stories of struggles echoed my own, their dreams revealing shades of ambition that once felt hidden beneath their dismissive exterior. Something within me flickered, a burgeoning understanding fueled by empathy. I saw them not as the antagonists of my story but as individuals who, like me, were navigating their own trials in a rapidly shifting world. The discussion eventually shifted towards our businesses. I could feel them leaning closer, seeking not just my counsel but aiming to share in mutual growth. And as I offered insights, I realized that this was what healing looked like, not denial of the past but rather embracing it as part of the complex tapestry of relationships. It felt liberating, almost as if by extending my hand despite my previous reservations, I was affirming my worth not just as a son-in-law but as a person with insights worth sharing. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, a new rhythm began to form. We exchanged phone calls that seemed to ease into the comfort of familiarity, their laughter weaving through my days like the melody of a calming hymn. Their once utilitarian approach to me transformed into a blooming collaboration of ideas. There was an almost childlike enthusiasm in their exchanges, a realization that they could learn from me just as much as I could learn from them. It was a refreshing reversal of roles that dispelled the lingering shadows of resentment. Yet, I upheld my boundaries. I was watchful, guarding against the cynical whispers that danced in the corners of my mind, reminding me of the bitter words once spoken. It was a balance, one that required patience and discernment, but I knew that healing isn't merely a linear journey, it's more like a winding path through an intricate forest, where even the hard roots can display breathtaking blooms when nurtured patiently. Sometimes, I still find myself reflecting on whether my initial decision to put distance between us was right. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? The answer remains murky, cloaked in the complexities of human emotion and interaction. Yet, through this journey, I have come to embrace the ambivalence, allowing it to shape me rather than confine me. I realize that forgiveness is not an erase button but rather an ongoing negotiation of ourselves with those we share history with. And so, where once I felt fragmented, haunted by the past, I now sit in a quieter place, knowing that bridges can be rebuilt if we are willing to put in the effort, and that sometimes, it's in our grappling with hurt that we stumble upon unexpected beauty. Perhaps it's true, sometimes, the road doesn't lead back to where we began, but rather forward, towards something entirely new.